Good morning, everyone. How is everybody? Okay. Nice sunny day. I'm sure we'd all like to be outside doing our Christmas decorations, right? Anyways, I want to welcome you to our security presentation. And what we'll start off with, before I get into all the details and everything, is I'm going to call in Reverend Michelle to come and do an opening prayer.
Good morning, friends, and welcome. Thanks for being here. I'm Michelle, and this is good that we can gather and have this time together. I'm just going to open with a blessing for us, so I invite you just to take a moment, to take a breath. We've arrived, so we can center ourselves in this space and have a prayer. Let us pray. Holy God, this is a beautiful day. We thank you for it, to see the water glistening on the grass and on the pavement, the sun. We're reminded of your goodness. It's all around us. We thank you that we've been able to come together today, and we give thanks for Jim, who is here with us. We just ask that you open our hearts and minds to what is being shared, and may it be something that we carry with us from here. Bless this time together, we pray. In your name, amen.
Thanks, Michelle. I forgot to introduce myself. For those who don't know me, I'm Lorraine Joint, and I'm co-chair of the Ministry and Personnel Committee, along with Mr. Peter Spratt, who's at the back there. And we want to welcome you again. Just a few housekeeping, no coffee, tea, or anything in the sanctuary. We will have a break about 10:45 for 15 minutes, and you can just go and have a little mingle out there. It will be for 15 minutes, and I'll call you right back at that point. If you did not get a copy of the presentation, I know I didn't have some of your emails. Please leave your email on the sign-in sheet, and that you want a copy of it, and I will get it to you. Also, Don, for his group, he's volunteered to email it as well. And let me see. Otherwise than that, I hope you enjoy the presentation. We'll have questions at the end. Although I'm sure Jim will take questions during the presentation as well. I'll let him handle that. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Jim. I've known Jim for a while. We were working together at the Ministry of Finance, but he is a very, very, very impressive man. So currently he's the manager of the Access and Privacy and Security with the Ministry of Finance. Before joining the Ontario Public Service in 2008, he worked with the City of Toronto as a senior security officer, overseeing the security systems portfolio. In his 30-year career as a security and risk management, he started in 1999 with extensive experience in both private and public sectors. In his current position, Jim is responsible for planning and managing the ministry's security and emergency management functions, and to ensure the protection of people, assets, critical infrastructure, and delivery time-critical services against loss, damage, and disruption. He's also in charge of the freedom of information part, so he's got a major portfolio. He's a board-certified professional with ASIS, International and Disaster Recovery Institute, having earned the designations of Physical Security Professional, Certified Protection Professional, and Associate Business Continuity Professional. He's also a member of the International Federation of Protection Officers, achieving the designation of Certified Protection Officer. In 2011, he became the Associate Instructor with the Crisis Prevention Institute, which allows him to teach nonviolent crisis intervention, which is known as the NVCI. Jim has also earned his AIC certification, allowing him to teach handcuffing, use of force techniques with a tactical baton. We won't be doing that today, just so we know. Lastly, Jim has been teaching martial arts to children and adults for the past 15 years at the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center. Welcome, Jim, and welcome to our training. I'm going to let Jim take it from here. Thank you.
Hier ist die Mindset. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Business. Das Gerät des Überlebensradar.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard. What are you thinking about?
Can you hear me? All right, fantastic. All right, so we just went through the agenda right now. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to start off with basically the legal powers of an owner-occupier. So just to define what this space is and who we are and everything else, this is the Westminster United Church. It is technically a private property, even though we invite people into it. It's no different from, say, a public building, like, for example, the Ministry of Finance building at 33 King in Oshawa, or perhaps a mall. We do invite people into it, but however, we still retain our authority as private property occupiers and owners. And so therefore, there are certain powers that are afforded to us under provincial legislation or perhaps even under federal legislation. We'll start off with the most basic piece, which is something called the Trespass to Property Act. Next slide, please. It's called the Trespass to Property Act. It's provincial legislation, all right? And basically, under this particular piece of legislation, there are 3 items that essentially make trespassing an offense. One is entering property where clearly says you're not supposed to enter. Like, for example, if there's a sign saying do not enter, restricted access, employees only, that sort of a thing, then that's basically a prohibition advising everybody that you should not enter. Anybody who chooses to enter thereafterwards, they're essentially trespassing. Second is, and possibly the most important part in relation to what we're talking about, is engages in activity on the premises which is prohibited. So, for example, when you go to a mall, when you go to a certain place, you might see signs saying, service animals only, or perhaps, no shoes, no socks, no service. You've seen that before, all right? So that's basically prohibitions to what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do when you're in the property itself. And then last but not least is fails to leave when directed to do so. So, for example, if someone approaches an individual and says, I'm sorry, sir, you're trespassing, I need you to leave. If they fail to do so, then basically they've committed an offense, all right? The Trespass to Property Act is fairly extensive. It actually provides quite a lot of powers to property owners and to occupiers. Now, yourself as volunteers and the staff here over at the church, you guys have the authority that's been essentially accorded to you by the owner of the church, all right? So you guys are agents of the church there often, so therefore you have the same powers as the occupier and the owner. So one of the key powers that have been afforded to you, basically you can arrest someone. It's called a citizen's arrest, but you can actually arrest someone for trespassing. Now, of course, you guys probably won't do that. You would likely call the police, but it's, again, just to give you some context on what your powers are, all right? So the act actually allows a police officer, an occupier of the premise, a person who's been authorized by the occupier to actually place someone on arrest for trespassing, all right? Again, those powers are fairly significant because essentially you're, removing someone's liberty from them, all right? However, one of the key parts here is that if you're not a police officer and you do arrest someone, one of your responsibilities is to turn that person over to the police officer as soon as possible, all right? The third piece that I want to touch on over here is the sort of debate over, am I allowed to be here? Because again, this is a bit of a gray area because after all, this is technically private property, but at the same time, we're inviting people into the building. And so therefore, what do we do? What do we say when someone says, I have a right to be here? So basically, there are two pieces. One is under the act itself, you have to have authority conferred to you under the law. So for example, you're a police officer, you're a bylaw inspector, there's a particular piece of legislation which actually says you are allowed to come in to this premise to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G for whatever purpose you're here for. That's one. Two is the express permission of the occupier. So someone actually gives you permission to come in. So because this is a church, by virtue of the premise that we're in, we're essentially providing limited permission into the church to engage in activities which is permitted by the church. Same thing with the mall, all right? The mall allows you to come in, invites you to come in for certain purposes like shopping, dining, whatever the case might be, but however, those are limited permissions which allow you to do only certain things. It doesn't allow you to come in and, cause problems or start a fight or any of that sort of things. So similar sort of limited prohibitions and limited permission as well. All right. One quick note is something called implied permission. So if we have a premise which invites people in, and there is a pathway sort of leading to a door, which is, goes into the premise, and that's leads into the premise which, people are invited into. There's an implied permission for people to walk on that pathway coming into the premise itself, all right? And we can't tell them that they're trespassing unless, of course, they're aware in advance that they have been trespassed. All right. So that sort of walkway leading up to the door, there's implied permission to use it. All right. So next slide, please. So then how do we tell someone that they're trespassing? All right, there's a number of ways to do it. We can do it either verbally in writing. All right, so verbally you tell someone, I'm sorry, sir, you're trespassing, I need you to leave. All right, or in writing. So for example, one of the things that I talked to Lorraine about was perhaps if we were able to identify the individuals who were involved in some of the activities they shouldn't be doing, then we make sure we identify them, we send them notice saying, from here on forth, you are barred from this particular property for 6 months, 1 year, whatever the case might be, all right? Sometimes that can be done in conjunction with the police. So, we send a written notice that they're actually not supposed to come here. Once we give that notice, what that basically means is that person is not allowed to come onto this property for whatever reason it happens to be, unless we provide limited permissions again. They're not allowed to come onto the property for the period that's been assigned. As soon as they step onto the property, we can say they're trespassing, they can actually be arrested, all right? Second is a posted sign. So remember I was telling you earlier, there might be limited admissions or limited permission to go in. If a posted sign that says, do not enter, staff only, so on and so forth, that will essentially say that, you're not supposed to come in. As soon as someone breaches that particular line, then they're trespassing, all right? And then there are different, red and yellow markers and stuff like that. You see some of that on the screen over here, all right? It could be a simple, like a caution line or something along those lines, basically indicating you shouldn't be coming in, all right? So those are basically the three methods of trespass. And then probably the most important part is the penalty for actually contravening the Trespass to Property Act is a fine of no more than $10,000. So again, it's fairly significant. It's pretty serious. All right. Next slide, please. All right. So the following slides focus on the Criminal Code of Canada. They talk about various pieces that are sort of relevant to our situation over here. The first one I'm going to talk about is defense of property. All right, so Section 35 states that persons cannot be found guilty if they're taking reasonable actions to basically defend property. Property being either real property, like for example, the space that we're standing in right now, or it could be personal property, like your purse, your car keys, so on and so forth, or it could be your car as well. All right, so they cannot be found guilty of an offense, like for example, if you're fighting with someone, technically, if you're grabbing them, pushing them, that's technically assault. And so therefore, this particular section of the criminal code says you cannot be found guilty if you're taking reasonable actions to defend yourself and defend your property, all right? Now, the key points is you're taking reasonable action, and we'll talk about reasonable in just a minute, to defend the property, and you're in peaceable possession of that property, because of course the law has to be fairly specific. There could be some dispute over whether this piece of whatever it is, let's say I'm arguing over a piece of paper. All right, this piece of paper, there could be an argument over who owns that piece of paper. So if there's a dispute over who owns it, then it's not really in peaceable possession. All right. And then there are some particular sort of aspects to it. And sorry, I'm going to step away from the mic. So there are some one, of course, one is trespassing. Sure. Hopefully this works. Flip on. Can you hear me? Okay, I'll just hang on to it. All right, specific circumstances of the incident. So, for example, could be weather conditions, could be, if the defender is a larger and more capable individual, if they were wounded because, they broke their leg or they broke their arm, they're in a cast, they can't walk, all those sort of things, those are taken into account as well. Right. Just wait for the next slide. No, it's all good. Okay, so now moving on to self-defense, all right? So if someone's actually attacking you, attacking somebody that is under your protection, somebody you care for, all right? So Section 34 of the Criminal Code states persons are not guilty in offense if they, again, believe on reasonable grounds that a force, meaning someone attack, or even threat of force, all right? So someone comes along and they're saying, they're verbalizing, they're going to hit you, they're going to assault you, they've got their fist cocked back, or they're, brandishing a weapon or something along those lines. That is sufficient grounds for us to say, I need to defend myself. You don't necessarily have to wait until someone actually throws the punch or actually hits you, before you start defending yourself, all right? And then second of all is the act that you do, so the act of defending yourself, is committed for the purpose of protecting yourself or the other person. Now, one of the key things is it's not just necessarily defending yourself as well. So, you're walking down the street with your grandchildren or something along those lines, and someone comes along and grabs one of the grandchildren and kicks them, you have the right to defend your grandchildren as well, all right? And then last but not least, the act is reasonable in the circumstances. And once again, we're using that term reasonable, which has a whole bunch of factors attached to it, including some of the things we talked about before, including nature of the force of the threat, so nature of the person who's coming after them. If that person is coming on hard and they're big and they're strong and they're using a weapon, then you know what? You do whatever you have to do, all right? Nature of the extent the force was used, all right, whether there was any other means available to be able to protect you, protect somebody else. All right. So this is where it gets a little bit of a gray area, because the law. So we don't have something. So in the state they have something called the Castle Doctrine. All right. Castle Doctrine basically means if you're in peaceable possession of property, it's your home is your castle. You should be able to defend yourself. Same thing with your person. If someone is coming after you, you should be able to stand your ground and fight without having to back off. In Canada, it's a little bit different. In Canada, we encourage, the law at least, encourage people to back off as much as they possibly can until they can no longer back off, and then, of course, the self-defense provisions apply. So B over there basically says the extent to which use of force was imminent and whether there was other means available to respond to potential use of force. So in this case, what they're basically saying is if there was an opportunity for you to back off safely and not get hurt, then they advocate for you to do that first before actually, start using force. C, the person's roles in the incident, whether the party in the incident was used a weapon, size, age, gender, and a whole bunch of other ones as well. That's very, very similar to the one we just talked to. All right. If you look on the lower left corner of the screen over here, these are basic legal terminology. When you hear the term justified, it means protected from criminal and civil liability. So if you see the word justified inside legislation, that's what it basically pertains to. Next slide, please. All right. This one here is called use of force. This is the one that's primarily used by police officers, by security guards, by whoever else. All right. Essentially, what it basically says: anybody who's required or authorized by law to do anything in the administration or the enforcement of the law. All right. As a private person like yourself. All right, as a peace officer or public officer, in the aid of a police officer or public officer. So for example, a police officer is trying to wrestle someone down to the ground because they're trying to arrest them. That individual is fighting that person, and you come along and you help the police officer, you are protected by Section 25, all right? And then B, by virtue of his office. That could be, whether, again, you're acting in a security role, or you've been assigned basically security duties or something along those lines, and you have a duty to be able to enforce the law in some way, shape, or form. If it says he, but it applies to both genders. He or she acts on reasonable grounds, is justified to doing whatever is required or authorized to do so, and in using as much force as necessary for that particular purpose. All right. That essentially basically gives you the power to use force if you are enforcing the law, basically. So that has a fairly broad reach. So for example, if we take back to the context of trespassing, in a mall where security guards are posted, if someone is trespassing, usual procedure is, they would of course advise the person they're trespassing. They would ask the individual to leave. If that person fails to leave, they would try to ask him again, give him lots of opportunities to do so, because trespassing technically is a fairly minor offense. But if all verbal attempts fail, the next step is for them to actually lay hands on the person and take them out. All right. Whether they go willing or not, that's their choice. But however, if the person isn't willing to do so, they can then escalate to the next level and literally drag the person out or carry them out or something along those lines. Similar things with someone placing someone on arrest. When you place someone on arrest, it's not just a matter of touching them on the shoulder and putting handcuffs on them. If they're fighting, you may have to wrestle them. You may have to fight with them. You may have to do other things like get in a whole bunch of your other officers in order to move in and to bring the person under control. So all those things are essentially covered under Section 25. The ability to be able to use force. Now, that said, there are limitations on Section 25. Section 26 basically says if you use excessive force, all right, and you are basically, criminally and civilly liable for it. The actual law says anyone who's authorized to use force is criminally responsible for any excess that is done. So the fine line for excessive force is defined by the courts, because legislation doesn't specifically say what constitutes use of force. There is something right now that's being used by both police officers and also security guards. It's basically called the use of force model. Once upon a time, it was the Ontario use of force model, but it's now been sort of nationalized. I don't have it on the screen right now, unfortunately, but basically it says when you're defending yourself, it's equal force against equal force. All right, someone throws a punch, you can throw a punch. If someone grabs you, you can grab them. That sort of a thing. Of course, that's not really a hard and fast rule, because again, it depends on the factors we were talking about before. Are you bigger? Are you stronger? What are the circumstances of the situation? Are they with a weapon? That sort of a thing. All right. But however, when it comes to enacting Section 24, I think was a second ago, when we're talking about actually using force in the administration of the law, when it comes to placing someone on arrest, removing someone from the property, the rules change a little bit. The general rule for that one is what they call force plus one. So if someone sits down, refuses to move, you can then pick them up and take them out. If they throw a punch, you can whack them, all right? So that's essentially the unofficial definition, all right? So again, when you're defending yourself, equal force against equal force. If you're doing something in the administration of the law, it's force plus one. Okay. Next slide, please. All right. Moving on then, the citizen powers of arrest. We mentioned earlier that anybody who's authorized by law to do so, or at least has a duty to do so, has certain powers afforded to them under the criminal code. So Section 494, Section number 1 says basically anybody may arrest without warrant a person who finds committing an indictable offense. All right, that's probably the key point. The second point over there is a person who unreasonably on police has committed a criminal offense and escaping pursued by persons with lawful authority to arrest that person. But however, that particular situation is going to be rare because essentially Part B says the only scenario that I can sort of think of off the top of my head is Part B is you're walking down the street, a lady suddenly screams, my purse, that person stole my purse. That's a situation where we would fall in Section number B, all right? So you believe, because of what the lady said on reasonable grounds, that individual has stolen her purse and she's chasing after him, so now you have authority afforded to you under Section 4941 to chase after that person, with that lady in order to grab that purse back. But 90% of the time, because we're talking about private property, anybody you find committing indictable offense. Now, there's a difference between indictable offense and sodomy offenses, and the definition is basically in the lower left-hand corner. Indictable offense is a more serious offense, like, for example, break and enter, assault, sexual assault, so on and so forth. All right. The maximum penalties for indictable offenses vary, but however, it includes life in prison because indictable offense includes murder. Now, the key part over here is Section 494, number 2, which applies more to you guys, is that the owner or a person in lawful possession of property or a person authorized by the owner, all right, may arrest someone without warrant finding a criminal offense. Not an indictable offense, a criminal offense. So a criminal offense has a much lower threshold. So basically, it's much less a serious offense, including summary offenses like vandalism, and of course, because the offense is lesser, the penalty is also lesser as well. Maximum penalty for a summary offense is $5,000 fine or 6 months in jail. But however, because you guys are acting in conjunction with property rights, you then have the authority under Section 4942 to arrest someone committing a criminal offense. If it was just on the street, and someone spits on the sidewalk, you have no authority to touch them. But however, here, again, I'm just using spitting on a sidewalk as an example because it's, we're not going to do that. But, for example, if you see someone spray painting the church on the outside, that's a criminal offense. It's a misdemeanor. It's a summary offense. They're committing vandalism, all right? So therefore, you then are empowered under Section 4942 to actually place that person under arrest, all right? And then the key part for the last part over here is, again, when it comes to any kind of a civilian or citizen's arrest, you do have to deliver that person to a police officer. So Section number 3 over here says anybody other than the peace officer who arrests a person without warrant has to deliver that person forthwith to a police officer. All right, next slide, please. All right, any questions about the sections we just talked about? So again, not encouraging you to go out and arrest people and grab them and beat them up and stuff like that. But again, it's, let you know what the law affords and it lets you know what you're protected under. Okay. Yes, go ahead, sir.
What's the definition of peace officer? There's no police?
Peace officer includes a police officer, includes a corrections officer, includes some provincial offenses officers as well. So under the Provincial Offences Act and under certain other legislations, people like, for example, provincial inspectors can be appointed as peace officers. There's a number of inspectors and a number of investigators at our ministry who are responsible for enforcing things like Tobacco Tax Act, stuff like that, or Fuel Tax Act. They've actually been appointed as peace officers, and those powers give them sort of slightly elevated powers over the average person. Any other questions? Yes, please. It applies to verbal abuse, though. Unfortunately, there's no provisions in the criminal code which talks about verbal abuse. This is where we're going to get into for the next section. But however, I mean, if someone is verbally abusing a property, that could be a contravention of the property's responsibilities and what you can do on the property. So, for example, this is private property. It's treated no different from, say, the living room of your house. And so, if someone's verbally abusing you in the living room of your house, you're certainly not going to invite them in. You're going to kick them out. And this is where trespass to property would come in. Okay. Questions? Yes, sir.
In a lot of cases, talking about the referring at this point, so we're in situations where we're either grading or we're having a faith service in public space and things of that nature. The verbal abuse and the noise, and they're disrupting something that we've got a permit to do that grade.
Okay.
A permit to do that.
Yep.
Does that change a lot of these, like, are the things that you just been going through applicable when you're in a public area, even though you've got a permit to perform that?
The private property rights and responsibilities of that particular area where you're holding it would apply in this case, because it's not property you own or you occupy. You're just temporarily occupying at this particular point. So, for example, you're having a parade in a park. Whatever bylaws and rules that are imposed on that park would then apply in this particular situation. So, for example, if you're holding a rally or a picnic at a park and someone comes along, wants to disrupt it, it's probably a good idea just to contact the city or the municipality who's responsible for that park and then ask them what the specific bylaws are for that particular park. If there are rules saying, you're not allowed to be disruptive, you're not supposed to whatever, then yeah, for sure, then you have the ability. But in that particular case, you probably shouldn't take action yourself, because the people responsible for enforcing the park would be the bylaw officers, police officers, anybody who's representative of the city. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? All right. Does anybody need to take a break? All right, we'll move on. All right. So the next section we're going to touch on to is communications, and this hopefully homes in a lot on what Lorraine was telling me before about some of the people who are disruptive. So far, what I've heard so far is that people who have been disruptive, they've only been verbal. They haven't been now that we've seen at least, they've been mostly disruptive because they've been verbal and so on and so forth. So hopefully this will then provide you with some tools to be able to work against that. All right. Part of this involves material from the Crisis Prevention Institute. As Lorraine mentioned earlier, back in 2011, I was trained as an instructor to provide this, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to start off with tactical communications. All right. So in tactical communications, the definition is a planned exchange of information between two or more people that is directed at a specific goal or outcomes with a suitable degree of understanding. Now, of course, within this communication continuum, there are a number of things. All right, so you've got a sender, you've got a receiver, but there's also other things in between which can control and or disrupt the message. All right, so on both sides, the sender has an encoding piece. On the receiver, they have a decoding piece. This is where understanding comes in. All right, so for example, if I'm speaking a different language, I'm encoding it in my language that I speak. But however, if you don't understand the language, your decoder won't be able to work on it. You won't be able to tell what I'm saying. All right. Also, other things that could interrupt, a smooth flow of communication and allow tactical communications is noise. Noise is really just anything that could disrupt it. It could be actual noise, like for example, if someone is jackhammering outside, we can't hear the other person speaking. If this mic fails to work and you can't hear me, all right? Or it could also be other factors as well. If the person has internal barriers or internal filters that prevent them from hearing you properly. Sometimes these things could be prejudice, it could be preconceived notions, they might enter the situation with a certain defiance, I guess you could say. These could also be barriers as well. So when they enter into the conversation, anything you say, they're going to ignore, disrupt, pretend it's not happening, all those sort of things. So in a smooth flowing communication process, the sender encodes the message in a way that the receiver is probably going to understand. The receiver has the necessary decoding devices and or ability to be able to decode the message, understand it fully. The message is fully received. There is no noise in between to be able to disrupt and perhaps change the message. And then in order to ensure that the receiver is actually receiving the message appropriately, the receiver actually provides feedback to the sender saying, yes, I do hear you, I understand. Perhaps they'll say nod their head, or perhaps they'll say yes, or something along those, some sort of affirmation which says, they're actually receiving the message in the proper manner. Next slide, please. So, of course, there are a number of goals to tactical communications, all right? So the goal in this particular case, especially if you're dealing with a subject person, your own personal safety. You may need to use tactical communications in order to get assistance, all right? Because if you're talking to someone a certain way, you're going to be talking you may start in a normal conversational tone, but when you start getting into into the sort of heat of the discussion, you're going to garner notice of yourself, and that's partially to get assistance for yourself. All right. Using tactical communications will also help to control your staff demeanor, because some of the things we're going to be talking about will give you hopefully some tools to be able to control the back and forth, maybe some of the verbal interventions we're going to be talking about. More importantly, controlling your staff demeanor will also help control the situation as well, because the last thing we don't want this thing to get out of control. We don't want it to get physical. We don't want the person to become, overly hostile, that sort of thing. Ideally, we want to keep it at verbal and then have them leave peaceably without having to involve the police or having, you guys having to drag that person out. All right. Of course, situation de-escalation, professionalism, these are all the things that's going to be really important later on, especially if the legal system becomes involved. All right. If they decide to use the law against you or try to use the laws against you, they try to sue you, they try to claim that you did something you didn't do, they call the police on you and say, this person grabbed me and assaulted me, whatever, when darn well it wasn't true, then this is where, some of that professionalism and the situation de-escalation will come in play, because it'll be, revealed in court. All right. Number 7, a positive witness. So anybody else who might be a bystander who's watching the situation, they will be able to account, and they will be able to say, well, no, I just saw a conversation between the two of them. I didn't see the two of them tussling. I didn't see the two of them grabbing. I didn't see them rough handling this person. And so they will become a positive witness for you. All right. And then at the end of the day, it's going to make the subject accountable for their actions. All right. And if it does end up in a legal arena, it'll be your story versus their story with a judge or perhaps a jury talking about it. And then, when the truth comes out, the subject will be accountable, all right? So, for example, a person comes in, they start causing a disruption, you go over, you talk to them, they start raising their voice, you tell them to leave, and then, things progress from there. When the truth comes out and the judge finally finds out, oh, the person came in to cause trouble, that will make that person accountable for their actions, all right? And then last but not least, justification of anything you might have to do as well. Now, I talked earlier about barriers. So there's a number of barriers to effective communications. I touched on a few of them, but here's a more fulsome list. So different personal filter areas. I was saying that, certain people may come in with preconceived notions. They may have some prejudices in mind. These are really filter areas. These feelings and or attitudes may actually cause them to not listen to you or just dismiss what you say altogether. Credibility of the sender, all right? They might think that, who's this guy talking to me? I don't have to listen to them, all right? Jargon. So, we want to make sure any communication that goes through is going to be straightforward in, what they call plain English, I guess you could say, all right? We avoid any legal language or anything like that, just plain speaking to the person so they understand. Semantic differences, we'll touch on that in just a minute, but, roughly 60% of communication is actually non-verbal in nature, all right? So, as I'm standing here talking to you, what you hear from my voice is really only 40% of the communication process. The rest of it is what they call nonverbal communications. How I'm standing, how my hands are going, the tone of my voice, all those sort of things. So this could lead to semantic differences, all right? The understanding of what you're saying or what I'm saying could be interpreted differently from other people. Proximity of persons communicating. If I'm talking to someone from way across the room and they can't hear me, obviously that's going to be a problem. Conversely, if I was talking 2 inches from their nose, that would also cause a problem as well, because I'm now in their personal space. All right. Information overload. If we provide them with too much information, it's not simple enough. In their current moment of stress, they may not be able to get the full details. All right. Especially if we're giving directions to people, we want to make sure it's simple and clear. Time constraints, if there's not enough time for you to be able to deliver information, especially for complex instructions and stuff like that, that could also be a barrier. And then last but not least, poor location and environment. Again, a lot of noise, perhaps it's not conducive towards conversation, maybe there's a lot of stress going on, whatever the case might be, then of course that'll be a barrier to our effective communications as well. All right, next slide, please. All right. So then how do we improve our communication skills? All right, so you mentioned earlier, you saw in the slide earlier, feedback is a really important thing. All right. So in the context of someone coming here and disrupting, one of the tactics or one of the strategies you could do is you speak to the person. Hi, Mr. So-and-so, thank you for attending our church. We noticed you have some personal opinions, but right now we have a public event going on. This event is peaceful, and we would like for you to stop waving your banner or stop causing a disturbance in the back. If you have any concerns, then please feel free to reach out to us afterwards, and we'll have a civil discussion about it. All right. Hopefully that will educate them and tell them exactly what needs to be done. If they refuse to do so, this is where, we have to use a little bit of feedback, all right? So, okay, before we get to that, so if they refuse to comply, they want to continue doing what you're doing, and this is where you have to start using some of the legal powers that are under use, that have been afforded to you by law. So you've asked them to stop, they refuse to stop. This is where you use the trespass. You say, okay, all right, I'm sorry, sir, I've asked you to stop. Right now you're doing something disruptive to the church. Right now I'm going to say you're trespassing and I ask you to leave. All right, this is where you apply the trespass. All right, so when you start using directive approach, you have to get a little bit of feedback going forward. All right. Again, just to make sure the communication is going through. So once you use that sort of power that's been afforded to you, sir, you're trespassing, and I ask you to leave. You may want to solicit feedback from them saying, do you understand what I'm saying? I'm telling you you're trespassing. I need you to leave, please. Please let me know you understand. All right. That's what feedback is. It's allowing them to provide feedback to you to say, do you understand what I'm telling you? Do you understand what I'm saying? All right. Provide message at a rate the receiver can absorb. So the information you provide for them, remember we were saying earlier, in a moment of crisis, in a moment of perhaps heated emotions, the individual may need very simple instructions. All right, they may not understand what trespassing means. They may need to hear the words, get out. All right, I need you to leave. All right, that sort of a thing. So provide the message at a rate and a language the person can actually understand. All right, good timing of the message. In this particular case, it's pretty cut and dry. Timing is probably not the most critical essence, but with some other conversations, yeah, good timing is going to be good. To ensure I think sanctity is probably not the right word, but just ensuring a harmonious environment, rather than going right to the person and saying, hey, you get out. Right, when they're causing a bit of disturbance, might be good to start the conversation with, hello, I'm so-and-so, who are you? This is a peaceful church service. I notice that you're, causing a bit of disturbance in the back. You're bothering the people in the church. You might want to start with that conversation rather than just screaming at the person, you, get out, right? So that's what I mean by, using good timing of the message, right? Simple language we talked about a minute ago. Be empathetic with the receiver. Again, we do operate in a bit of a legalistic environment, and so therefore we want to make sure that whatever actions that we take are going to be defensible in court. All right. If they claim that you were a hothead, if they claim that you went overboard and you're doing all the things, you want to make sure that you showcase that you have a pattern of behavior of empathy and a pattern of behavior of reasonableness. Right, like going up to the person, introducing yourself, saying, we're here in a peaceable position, we're doing something peaceful, yet you insist on disrupting it, we're going to ask you to leave. So that sort of progression, all right? Using repetition. So the person has disrupted the service that you're in, you've asked them nicely to leave, they refuse to leave. This is where you say, sir, I'm not sure you understand me the first time. Right now, I'm telling you you're trespassing. I need you to leave, please. Use repetition. Encourage trust. In some cases, we can try to encourage trust, all right? In some cases, if the person is just not willing to listen, then trust, unfortunately, is going to be very, very difficult to build. But even in challenging situations, you might be able to do so, all right? Like, for example, sir, I need you to leave. This is a peaceful congregation. If you want, we can talk to you afterwards. Believe me, if you just wait outside, I will come get you. All right, encourage that trust. Let them think or let them believe or actually be honest with them and say that, you're going to engage in dialogue with them afterwards. Right? Last but not least, create an effective listening environment. So, remove the noise, remove any distractions that might be there that might interrupt your ability to communicate to the person. All right. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is where we're going to start diving into the actual sort of heart of crisis intervention itself. The full course for this particular course is about 8 hours. Actually, the one that includes the physical parts is actually 16 hours. So we're going to try to condense it as much as possible. Lorraine explained to me what some of the issues are here. So we're going to focus on the ones that I think are going to be most applicable to us. Mostly going to be about verbal intervention, how to deal with someone who's argumentative with you, that sort of a thing. All right. So we'll start with sort of some definitions. So what is crisis? So a couple of notable psychologists basically used this definition. They said it's a perception or experience of a difficult event or situation that exceeds the person's current resources and coping mechanisms. All right. So sort of imagine the scenario behind that. Let's use yourself as an example. Your granddaughter phones you up and says, Grandpa, Grandma, I'm in a bit of a bind. And you say, what's wrong? And she says, I'm pregnant. So that might stir up a little bit of, feelings inside of you. Or you just bought a car. You're driving it on the lot. It's brand new. You love it. You've been waiting for this car for a long time. As soon as you drive it along, someone broadsides you, T-bones you, wrecks your brand new car. You just driven off the lot. That might cause some crisis within you. All right. There's other examples as well, as you can imagine. All right, there's lots of things that could cause crisis. So then, based on crisis, what do we do about it? All right, crisis. Well, hopefully we're rational and reasonable beings. We will try to think about what's going on. We will try to pick apart the situation, control ourselves, handle the situation appropriately. That's us as rational human beings. But sometimes, depending on the situation, depending on our capacity to be able to handle crisis, as the definition sort of suggests, some people aren't able to control themselves as well. All right. So what do those people do? They might yell, they might scream, they might fight, they might have a toddler moment, for lack of a better term. All right. This is where they lose control, and this is where sort of crisis takes over for them. So then, knowing what that crisis is, and definition and everything else, what exactly is crisis prevention? Basically, it's a program developed by an organization called Crisis Prevention Institute. The full program is called Nonviolent Crisis Intervention. Essentially, it's a behavior management system designed to aid in the management of disruptive and even assaultive persons using de-escalating behavior. All right. And this could be either verbal or nonverbal intervention skills, but today we're just going to focus on verbal intervention because we don't want to get too far into, this is not a karate class. All right. So again, who is CPI? Why should we worry about them, or why should we listen to their teachings? So again, CPI stands for Crisis Prevention Institute. It was established back in 1980. It's been around for a long, long time. All right. So back in the 70s, there was sort of a black and white way of dealing with things. If the person was nice, you dealt with them nicely. If the person was not nice, well, you clobbered them in the head with a stick. All right. So it was a really black and white sort of way of doing things. But they suddenly realized back in the 80s that there's a lot of gray area in between. You can't just be nice to someone and clobber someone else, right? It doesn't work in court. So what they needed then, they needed to found a system which could handle sort of some of the mid-level stuff, verbal intervention skills, ability to recognize emotion for someone else, all those sort of things to handle that gray area in between someone who is completely compliant and completely peaceful versus someone who is going off the rockers. All right. This training is currently mandatory for a lot of frontline sort of occupations, including police officers, nurses, doctors, child educators, so on and so forth. All right. Because you can imagine those are the people who will deal with someone who's going through crisis on a regular basis. All right. Next slide, please. All right. We're going to start today with what we call the crisis development model. Okay. So there are various stages in crisis, starting on the left-hand side of the screen over here. So anxiety, defensiveness, acting out, tension reduction. If you take a look at this from an escalating and de-escalating scale, you can sort of see a bit of a pyramid appearing out of it. So anxiety is sort of the beginning levels of the crisis stage. If that anxiety is not reduced or effectively managed, the next stage of crisis will be defensiveness. And then if that particular stage is not effectively managed, then the next stage you'll be acting out. And then conversely, on the other side of the, on the downslope of the pyramid, after the person acts out and they're brought under control again, this is where the stage comes tension reduction. So the appropriate staff response for each one of them is right next to it. So for example, again, someone who is experiencing anxiety, the appropriate response or the appropriate staff approach in this particular case is what we call the supportive approach, all right? So let me use, Lorraine, can I borrow you for a second? All right. So Lorraine's going to be a good guy. I'm good at playing the bad guy.
We were going to do the other way.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So let's use the context of airport screening. Airport screening is one of those locations where it's kind of hit and miss, depending, especially if you're in the States. All right. So I'm an airport screener, and Lorraine is coming through. She's going on holidays. She's going through and stuff like that. And so I'm going to give you two approaches. Lorraine is not overly happy about having to go through screening because, she's going to be late for her flight. There's a long line. She's going through a little bit of anxiety. All right, so I'll showcase two different examples of how myself as the airport screener would react or act, and then Lorraine can tell me how she feels, all right? And here's act number one, all right? Hi, Lorraine, my name is Jim. I'm an airport screener. I'm here to help you.
Can we just get this over with?
Okay, all right, so that's one, all right? All right. Second one is, hi, Lorraine, I'm the airport screener. We have to do this and so on and so forth. Can I get you to put your bag on the line, please?
All right, just hurry up, okay?
Okay, all right, thank you. All right. All right. So for the airport screener then, which response is going to be better received in this particular situation? I think it's pretty cut and dry. Yeah, absolutely, second one, all right? Because if a person is already going through anxiety and the subject person comes at them hard, it's really going to get them defensive. That's where the second stage comes in, all right, defensiveness. So that's what we're saying about a supportive approach. If we're approaching a particularly dicey situation and you think there's going to be some anxiety involved, all right, the recommendation is to use a supportive approach, keeping in mind that you've got a whole bunch of tools behind you that you can use later on. Using a supportive approach, being empathetic, approaching it from a Christian perspective, if I use that term, all right, is going to be the one that's going to get you the most support later on and get you probably the best results as well. All right. Okay, so assuming then anxiety, occurs, the supportive approach is used, but however the person is not responsive. All right, the person is not responsive. This then leads to what they call the defensiveness stage. Defensiveness stage, basically the person's now got their back up, their emotions are heightened, they're now feeling like they're almost like they have to fight you. There's sort of a combative element to it. So then when a person reaches this particular stage, how do we deal with that individual? So the appropriate staff response is we switch gears from the supportive approach into what we call the directive approach. All right. One of the key things, just to take a step back, one of the key things about nonviolent crisis intervention is it's not about being nice and giving up, being someone's doormat. It's really about showcasing good behavior, but at the same time maintaining your authority, which goes back to the Trespass to Property Act. It goes back to your powers being, agents of the occupier of this property, where it's not about giving ground, it's not about all those things, but it's about managing the behavior in a manner that's going to be reasonable in the eyes of the court, so that later on, if whatever happens, your behavior is going to be showcased as the model one, as opposed to the other person's. So going back to defensiveness. So when they're defensive, they're going to be doing a whole bunch of things. They're going to be exhibiting everything from argumentative nature. They're going to be refusing. They're going to experience a lot of challenging behaviors. So the appropriate staff response against someone who's going through the defensive crisis stage is what we call a directive approach. Directive approach is much more short, much more sort of clean cut. It's basically, we're no longer in supportive. We're now telling the person what to do. All right. So in the context of that sort of a trespassing scenario that I talked about earlier, you use a supportive approach. You talk to them. You say, hey, I'm so and so. Listen, what you're doing in the back is really disruptive towards the people here. We're having a peaceful assembly, and yet you insist on shouting and doing whatever. I need you to stop. They refuse to stop. Okay, sir, we've asked you to stop. We asked you nicely. Now we're going to go into directive. Sir, you refuse to stop. I'm sorry, we're going to have to tell you to leave now. You're trespassing. That's example of directive approach. All right. If they refuse to do that, then okay, sir, you know what? We're going to call the police. That's going to be the next step. All those sort of things. Now, within the defensive and crisis stage, there's a whole bunch of subsections we'll talk about in just a minute. But the directive approach is sort of the primary response that we're going to talk about. In a minute, we're going to go through the actual, what they call the verbal intervention continuum, which has 5 different stages that are within the defensiveness. The third crisis stage is acting out. So we've tried all the verbal. We've tried to be nice to someone who's going through anxiety. We've directed someone to leave because they're going through defensiveness. Now they have basically lost all rationality. They're perhaps acting out. They may be yelling. They may be screaming. They may be throwing furniture. Maybe even throwing punches, being assaultive, all those sort of things. This is where physical intervention comes in. All right. In your case, obviously, we're in a peaceable environment. We don't want to get into fisticuffs. So we'll talk about, personal safety probably in the section just after this one over here. But some sort of physical intervention, is needed for you guys to keep yourself physically safe. The last crisis stage is tension reduction. This is, again, we're going down the downside of the pyramid. The heightened emotions are being lowered. This is usually after the person has been brought back under control. Whether they bring themselves under control themselves or whether someone has come in to bring them under control, like the police, then this is where tension reduction comes in. The heightened emotion, the adrenaline and everything, all those chemicals are now flowing down. They're starting to regain their rationality. And at this point, one of 2 things will happen. One is they will continue to be defiant, which is fine. But in some cases, they'll actually start feeling remorse. They suddenly start realizing that, oh, I really did a stupid thing. And so this is where regret comes in. They may be apologetic. And it's really important for us to have the appropriate staff response to this one as well, because in this case, if we don't use the proper response, it could re-escalate things once again. Okay. I won't use this guy. I'll use the example. So for example, you have a good friend. You got a little bit of drink inside of you and you get into an argument. All right, things happen. You walk off on your separate ways. And the next morning, your friend calls you. They suddenly realize, oh, geez, you know what? I had a little bit too much to drink. I said some stupid things. I'm going to call my friend to apologize. This is where they're in a stage of tension reduction. There's 2 different options you can pick to respond to that person who's calling to apologize. You can say, oh, you know what? That's okay. This is option 1. This is okay. You know what? We're still friends. I know both of us had some heated conversations last night. You know what? Why don't we get together, have a coffee? We'll talk about some of these things that, maybe we may have conflict over. That's option number 1. Option number 2 is you take advantage of the person who's feeling remorse and you get at them. You say, what? You're just calling to apologize? You better take me out to dinner, you stupid so-and-so, and you actually escalate the situation. So in this case, it's fairly cut and dry. Which option is going to garner you the best long-term results? Of course, this option is going to be number 1. Because if you choose option number 2, you're probably going to lose that friend and you may actually gain an enemy instead. So this is where we call therapeutic rapport, all right? The appropriate staff response is therapeutic rapport for someone who's going through tension reduction. So we want to restore our own control of our emotions and then go back to a quasi-supportive approach, all right? So the person is feeling remorse. The person wants to lower the temperature of the situation. We're going to do that with them as well. All right, we're going to go back to the supportive approach. We're going to work with them, and then not at the same time though. We're not, giving ground, as we're saying. We're not giving up authority. We're going to work with them. We're going to lower the temperature of the situation. We're going to speak to them in calmer tones, but at the same time, we want to make sure that there is a good long-term solution to what's going on. So as part of the therapeutic report, we want to make sure, let's get the root of the problem, let's analyze it, and then find a solution for it. In this case, the solution is going to be fairly cut and dry. It's going to be fairly simple. You're welcome to come into our service, but we ask you not to come in and disturb it, all right? Please come in with an open mind. I don't know what your background is or, what your belief or faiths are, but come in and participate. Keep an open mind. If you have comments, leave them afterwards. Stay peaceful, all right? If you don't like it, then you don't have to come back. We're not forcing anybody to come. If you want to discuss it, we're open to discussing it. But here are basically the round rules. We're open to further discussion afterwards. If you want to engage in activity that will helpfully resolve your core issues. But however, if you just don't want to engage with us, then that's okay as well. So hopefully that piece will then, again, reduce the potential for violence, reduce some of the negative emotions, and then at the same time, provide an avenue towards hopefully a long-term solution. Okay, so the next part is something we're going to talk about. We're going to get into something called nonverbal behavior. So I mentioned earlier that communications, only 40% of it is actually verbal in nature, all right? So the sound of my voice and everything else is only 40% of what you're receiving. The rest of the communication, the vast majority of it, is really based on what they call nonverbal behavior, all right? One of the key pieces of nonverbal behavior is something called proxemics. All right? So Jen, can I borrow you for a second, please? Thank you. All right. So Jen is my wife, and so there are different, everybody's heard the term personal bubble, right? Everybody has a personal bubble. That personal bubble depends on your relation with that person, the circumstances, all those sort of things, all right? Jen being my wife, I'm very comfortable being here, all right? But however, if I were a complete stranger and I did this, I would probably earn myself a slap. If I were a friend, then Jen would appreciate me being this far, all right? But, if I were a family member, perhaps close again. But, our own personal space is dependent on a whole bunch of factors, okay? So I'm just going to showcase something with Jen over here. So if I were communicating with Jen and I was a complete stranger, Jen, how would you feel if I was a complete stranger and I was talking to you this close?
Oh, move back.
Exactly. So it gives you a feeling of unease, all right? But however, if I were a family member and I was talking to you, you wouldn't feel you wouldn't feel so nervous about it. All right, thanks. So this is basically what proxemics is, all right? It's basically just personal space, the personal bubble that you need to be able to communicate with someone, all right? You see some examples on the bottom over there. The bottom right is not a good example because this is of course, UFC, and they're nose to nose because they're trying to intimidate each other. So if your intention is to intimidate the person you're communicating with, then by all means do so. But as you can imagine, the outcome will probably be violence, all right? And of course, we're talking about non-violent crisis intervention, not violent crisis intervention, so we're gonna try to avoid that. All right. Back. Thank you. Proxemics, I remember I was telling you earlier, is dependent on a number of factors. Relationship is certainly one of them. I mentioned, depending on your relationship with the person, awareness and knowledge of them. Also, it could be a whole bunch of other factors, like, for example, the situation. If the individual is hostile, you may want to create additional distance between them and you, when you're communicating. And we'll talk about personal, reactionary gap in just a little bit later. But also the situation also sort of has an impact as well. So the distance that we were just talking about a minute ago, Jen, can I borrow you for a second? All right. Let's just say we're lining up at Tim Hortons. All right, we're lining up at Tim Hortons. I'm a complete stranger to Jen, all right, and she's facing the other way, all right. Because we're lining up at Tim Hortons, it's actually okay for us to line up this close. If it was anything else, it wouldn't be, all right. If we were lining up for the ATM that was this close, how would she feel? Not so good. Yeah, exactly. So situation also has an impact as well. Thanks, man. Situation has an impact as well. So there's a whole bunch of different factors that may affect our ability to that desire for personal bubble, personal space. But the important thing is that proxemics is a type of nonverbal behavior. So when we're communicating with someone, we want to make sure that we keep good proxemic space. Culture has a fairly significant impact on proxemics. In our North American society, and also in Europe as well, the standard greeting for two strangers is to shake hands. And so therefore, the distance that's required between us and someone to shake hands is roughly maybe 1.5 feet, the distance required to reach across. Different parts of the world, there may be different ways of greeting. Like, for example, in Japan, the greeting is not to shake hands, but to bow, all right? So if you were only 1.5 feet away, guess what happens to your heads? Right, so that may not work as well. So these proxemics might be a little bit wider. Conversely, if you go to the Middle East, or perhaps somewhere in the Holy Land, the general greeting is not to shake hands or to bow, but to kiss each other on both cheeks. All right, and so I don't think I can do that if the person's 3 feet away. Right. So again, culture has an impact on it as well. But I guess the fundamental thing over here is that when we're communicating with someone, we want to make sure we have good proxemics, good distance between them, not just from a sort of good communications perspective, but also from a respect perspective as well, right? We want to make sure that, when we're communicating with them, we're showing our respect. Hopefully they will display respect back to us, and so on and so forth. Okay. Next slide, please. Kinesics, all right? So kinesics is basically a fancy scientific term to describe body language, all right? Includes a whole bunch of things, including facial expressions, gestures, postures, motion, eye contact, However, it can also be impacted by culture and situation. And as you can see on the board over here, there's a whole bunch of things, like, for example, sounds, ways of talking, posture, appearance, closeness, body contact, for example, shaking hands, facial expressions, all those ones over there. And also hand movement, believe it or not. Hand movements actually contribute to kinesics as well. And we'll showcase some of those in a minute. Next slide, please. Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. I guess everybody needs a break. So we'll pause there, and we'll take a bit of a 15-minute bio break, and we'll continue afterwards. Okay, thank you.
So I figured out
Hello, if we can get started again, please. All you people out in the narthex.
Testing.
I think we're disturbing a lot of the morning entertainment out in the back there. Of course, it's the Joannes. Okay. Welcome back, everybody, and I'm going to let Jim take back over again.
So welcome back, everyone. So before the break, we were talking about kinesics and what it basically means. And just do a quick recap. It's facial expressions, gestures, postures, motions, and eye contact. I remember we were saying earlier that communication, actually most of the communication that you receive from somebody else is actually, 60% of it is actually nonverbal in nature. And that's one of the reasons why we're talking about this. All right. So next slide, please. So when we're talking about facial expressions, there's basically 7 universal ones. And you know, we learn these facial expressions ever since we're a child, all right? Ever since we were a baby, we learn these facial expressions from our parents, and they're fairly uniform. So for example, joy, surprise, contempt, sadness, anger, disgust, fear, all those things are you know, we learn them almost instinctively at this particular point. All right. Sorry. There's a few more to go. When we're actually doing a facial expression breakdown, there's a number of factors that's associated. Everything from brow raise or lower, upper lid of your eyes, the shape of it, cheek raises, nose wrinkling, all those sort of things. All those muscles that are in your face actually you know, contribute towards your facial expression. And a lot of those expressions, some people are very good at it, like, you know, for example, if you practice a lot, you can maintain a poker face. But however, for the rest of us, oftentimes, you know, especially if we're surprised by the situation we find ourselves in, it's difficult for us to be able to actually control our facial expressions. You see some sort of sign of it. And then in the context of the situation we find ourselves over here, especially if you're communicating with someone, very rarely will you be able to find someone who's going to be able to maintain their composure when they're talking to you. You can generally tell what kind of expression, what kind of feelings they're exhibiting just by the facial expressions they have. All right. Next slide, please. We also have something called micro expressions, all right? So if you take a look at the screen over here, the facial expressions for the young lady over here is actually quite similar. They're not that different from each other. Micro expressions are basically very, very fast expressions of face that occur probably for a split second, especially for someone who's trying to maintain a poker face, but especially if the situation changes, you can see it very, very quickly. And our eye actually is able to capture that because we see roughly at 30 frames per second. And so, you know, even if it's just for a split second, you can tell from someone's expression what they're feeling, all right? So as you can see from the top left of there, it's fear, maybe it's disgust, anger, you know, determination, sadness, just based on the shape of the eye, relaxed of the jaws, perhaps the pursing of the lips, all right, narrowing of the eyes, so on and so forth, all right. And again, these emotional sort of expressions on their face are very, very quick, especially if someone's trying to maintain their composure. They'll show it just for a split second, and they'll go back to it being a poker face, but you can generally catch these. Next slide, please. Moving on then to gestures, all right? So common gestures, you know, so on the top left corner over here, I think that's pretty common. What does that usually signify for us? It means call me, absolutely, all right? The bottom left, lady with a hand, perhaps, you know, oops, I said something I'm not supposed to, or perhaps I'm not feeling well, all right? Top right, all right? Scratching his head, teenager, what does that usually say? What does that mean? All right, and then more scarily, this guy at the bottom over here. All right, he's obviously not having a good day, and he's letting you know. Next slide, please. Hand positioning is also really, really important. All right? When you're talking to someone, especially people who are orating, or perhaps there are people talking to you, some people communicate with their hands. Like sometimes I like to communicate with their hands as well. All right? But the position of the hand actually has some significance. All right? So the palm up position is actually a sign of submission. Historically, they said palm up is what beggars do on the street. Their hands are up. All right? And so it's considered a sort of a submissive, non-threatening gesture. All right? Palm down is the opposite. It signifies authority and dominance. I don't know if you've seen some of the older movies from the 50s and stuff like that, with the Romans or perhaps some of those empires. The Caesars always going, "You will do this," all right? So essentially, it's a palm down position. The one that what we want to be sort of most familiar with is palm closed, almost a fist, finger pointed. All right. Essentially, that's a much more directive and possibly hostile gesture. All right. Historically, it's supposed to symbolize the finger as a club, and you're essentially verbally clubbing the person in submission. All right. But however, anybody who points at you is usually a bit of a hostile gesture, right? Next slide, please. Now, remember I mentioned earlier that gestures and body language and stuff like that could be impacted by culture. Okay. So the top left corner over here is a photo captured in Spain, Macedonia, so on and so forth. This particular gesture is actually quite rude over there. All right, I can't remember exactly what I think the words muska or musaka or something like that. Anyways, it basically symbolizes someone rubbing feces in your face. Not very nice. All right, top right corner. Anybody from Italian heritage? All right, do we know what this is? Yes, absolutely. That's basically what you're doing. All right, again, not very respectful. All right, and then there are some other signs or gestures that may be perfectly fine in our society, but not so much in other places. All right, so this one over here, anybody's gone to a game, what does this mean? Time out. All right, but however, over in Japan, it means check please. All right, all right. This one over here, we all know thumbs up. All right, actually, it probably stems back from Roman times. All right, thumbs up, good for you, sort of that. In other places, actually means go take a hike. All right, next slide, please. This one's all, quite controversial. So we know the AOK sign over here. We're fairly familiar with it. If we're in South America and you see a gentleman or somebody with that down there, it's quite the opposite. All right, the hole symbolizes another orifice. So again, it has quite an impact depending on where you are. All right, next slide, please. Posture, all right? Posture is going to be really important, especially when you're communicating with someone. How they stand, how they're sort of facing towards you is going to be really sort of important. Arms akimbo, which is what this young lady is doing. Her arms are out like this, symbolizes authority, all right? So if someone's talking to you like this or talking down to you, they're trying to project authority. They're trying to tell you that they're in charge, and they're trying to tell you what to do, all right? So if you do that, then you're projecting that authority as well. And for someone who's going to be won't react well, they may, become hostile towards you. Arched eyebrows, we've seen that quite a lot, especially in shows and stuff like that. It symbolizes authority, symbolizes, what they said has just caught your attention, maybe not necessarily a positive way. Feet facing directly towards someone. Generally, when we speak to someone, we want to be able to face them, and we look at the position of their feet in order to do so. If we're talking to someone from the side, A, it's awkward, and B, it symbolizes a little bit of disrespect as well because you're not talking to them, all right? Direct eye contact. This is going to be affected by cultural. So here, it's respectful to look at someone in the eye when you're talking to them. But in certain parts of the world, if you look them directly in the eye when you're talking to them, it's actually a challenge there to their person. They may actually take it as a challenge. Right. Mirroring. So mirroring is supposed to symbolize what they're saying you're actually in emotional kind of congruence with. All right. So if they're interested in what you have to say, they're actually listening to what you say, they will start mirroring your actions. So if you're sitting down, you're talking to someone, you cross your legs, they'll cross their legs. All right. That subconsciously symbolizes the fact they're actually listening to what you're saying, and they're actually engaged with you, and they're starting to feel sort of emotional bond. All right. Squinting, sometimes it could be. I mean, Clint Eastwood squints all the time, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything, right? But however, squinting could be they can't see, or it could be they're thinking about something and it's causing them to squint. Shaking your legs, some people it's just a habit, but other people could be a sign of impatience. All right, they're shaking their leg because they're like, all right, I'm tired of this. When is it going to end? All right. All right. Arms crossed. This is one of the ones that I'm generally concerned about. If arms crossed could be one of two things. It could be I'm cold, or it could be I'm not interested in what you have to say. All right. So when you receiving communications from an individual, you usually use the totality of what they're doing, not just what they're doing or what they're saying, but the combination of all of them. So if their expression is negative, they've crossed their arms, their body language is tightened up, the combination of all those things usually communicate a whole lot of things to you. So for example, if you're talking to someone, you're saying, hey, how are you? Welcome to my church. We're having a peaceful discussion over here. We're having a peaceful service, and you're really causing a disruption. Can we ask you to stop or perhaps go outside to do your thing? And they're like, this? You can tell already that they're not receptive to what you have to say, all right? And from that situation, you sort of mentally think about how you're going to respond to the next one, all right? Do I continue to talk to them nicely, or do I start moving on towards a directive approach because I know the person's going to say, go take a hike, right? From a safety perspective as well, all right, this is going to be important. We're going to talk about a reactionary gap in a little bit. So, if you're having a discourse with someone and you're talking to them and you start off nice, but, they're becoming really defensive and they're starting to, attribute certain behaviors, those behaviors should signal some not alarm bells, but some caution within you, right? You're talking to someone and you're trying to, talk sense to them, but they're completely shut off. They don't want to talk to you, and then they start exhibiting behaviors that like this, or perhaps they're getting themselves into a bit of a sort of a stance. Then these are some of the danger signs that we should be aware of. Lowering your head. So lowering your head is, again, a sign of submission. If someone is lowering their head, it means that they want to, some people fake lowering their heads, but for the most part, if they're lowering their head, it means that they're actually receptive towards your authority. It's a sign of submission. So generally, it's a good thing, but also, don't let your guard down. If they're lowering your head because they're just, trying to think of the next tactic to use against you, then be aware of that as well. Next slide, please. All right. There's a number of other postures over here. This is basically to business people, sort of showing. Again, you see signs of authority, like arms akimbo. All right. This one over here, basically, if you see someone sort of crunch together like that, it's a sign of submission, as you can see. Same with the lady next to them. All right. Someone who's going to be a little bit more authority will be exhibiting behavior like this. All right. Again, I'm in charge. No one can get past me. All those sort of things. Leg position is also important as well. All right. If someone shrugs their shoulders, that's a universal sign of, I don't know what's going on, don't ask me. All right. And then also, sometimes people just feel comfort closing arms. But however, this position, sort of like this, is very different from this. All right. Next slide, please. Posture, all right. There's some, fairly open signs and, widely recognizable signs from people, all right. This lady over here, along with her facial expression and along with the hand going up, what do you think she's saying? Go away, I'm not interested, don't talk to me, talk to the hand, all those sort of things, all right. The middle one over here, again, the combination of the facial expressions and everything else, all right. Almost a picture of aloofness. All right. And then this person, again, their hand is up, but in this case, I think maybe they had a little bit too much to drink. All right. Next slide, please. Now we get into some of the more controversial and potentially harmful postures. All right. So if you see situations like this, again, we don't know, we weren't there in the situation, we haven't read about what happened here, but the posture and the interactions, you can tell already, all three of them are very, 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 potentially dangerous. All right. Over here on the left over here, obviously this individual, you see him in a bit of a stance. He's got his hand up. He's pointed towards the individual. All right. And it looks like he's trying to lecture him or, trying to tell him off. But if you look subtly at the man on the right, if you take a look at his reaction, all right, he's also not helpless. He's also not helpless because his body language tells me, bring it on. All right. So once again, if you find yourself in a situation, even though there's not great signs like the one on the left, if you see someone in this position over there, that's also someone that you should be aware of as well. All right, because he's ready. he's saying bring it on, all right? The one on the right over here, okay, you can clearly see what's going on. The one on the right is the aggressor. The one on the left, hands up, hey, listen, I don't want any trouble, all right? I'm going to walk away, all right? This one is obviously the aggressor, and the one on the right. And then the one in the middle are the ones that I particularly want to focus on greatly, all right? So especially nowadays, with our, current fashion style. Actually, the current fashion style has been in place for about 20 years. But, with loose fitting clothing, jackets over, all that sort of a thing, it's kind of important for us to watch for anything that might be tucked in. Nowadays, there's a lot of folks out there, they may be carrying a weapon, could be carrying a knife, could be carrying a gun, could be doing whatever, right? So if we see any of these signs, these are things we want to be aware of, all right? Reaching for something behind them, reaching for something inside their jacket. Gangster style, they like to put their weapons down, in front of their pants. Hopefully they're not too silly, but however, sometimes they do because they watch too many movies, all right? But any one of them could be a danger sign. Next slide, please. Okay, if we can switch gears to, actually no, we'll continue with this one. Yes, go ahead, please.
I just want to caution over body language
Yep.
and stuff like that, because if you're dealing with neurodiverse individuals, it's not aggressive behavior, but I'm a fidgeter.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I cross my arms all the time because it helps me focus.
Yep.
So I just want to be everybody to be cautious about body language.
Yep, absolutely. That's why, when it comes to communication, we take many different sources of information, whether it's facial expressions, body language, the way we say, which we'll get into just a minute. We take the totality of that in order to analyze what's going on. Most of the things we've been talking about so far, we sort of instinctively know because we recognize facial expressions throughout our life. But however, there may be signs that we may have missed during that time, and then we want to be aware of some of them, that's all. Okay? Okay, all right, so the next part, no worries. So the last part of sort of paraverbal communications, which we'll touch on, is something called paraverbal communication, all right? It's also known as how we say what we say. So I'm just going to quickly tell you the same sentence, but it's going to be spoken in different ways. All right, and notice the emphasis on certain words. The full sentence is, I didn't say I had $100, all right? And I'll say it to you in various ways. I didn't say I had $100. That's one way. Part number two, I didn't say I had $100. All of a sudden the meaning changes a little bit, all right? So the first one was, what I'm communicating is, I'm not the one who said $100. The second part is, I didn't say I had $100. Notice how I changed the word I say in order to change the tone of it, all right? I didn't say I had $100. Again, the meaning changes, all right? Other than, first one was, I didn't say it. This is, I didn't say I had $100. And then the last one is, I didn't say I had $100. So 4 different ways of saying it, 4 different meanings altogether. And so when we break down the communications of our paraverbal, it then goes into, changing the meaning of it. So when you look at it from a totality, everything from how they say what they say, posture, gesture, hand movements, facial expressions, all those things then come together into a full package that we then take in through our eyes, through our ears, in order to sort of interpret what they're saying. That said, there could be times that, for example, remember earlier about tactical communication, sender, receiver, encoding. Some of the things that we see, our decoding mechanism may be a little bit different from theirs. If they're from a different culture and I do this, they might think, oh my gosh, the guy's telling me to go do something with my orifice, right? So again, they could have a particular impact. All right. Okay, so now we're going to jump into verbal interventions. So if we can, oh gosh, there's 170 of them. Let me go back there and I'll try to scroll in.
Sorry, I didn't know where you were.
Yeah, I can't remember which slide it was.
Cameras.
It's verbal interventions. Look for a kite.
Kite?
Yeah, it looks like a kite. Yeah, keep going. Oh, there it is, right there.
Right
Yeah.
there?
Yep, that's the one. So I mentioned earlier that when a person gets in the defensive stage, there's a number of behaviors that sort of operate in that gray area on how do we handle someone who's argumentative, someone who's refusing, all those sort of things. There's a 5-step process which goes into what we call the verbal escalation continuum. And hopefully this will then provide you with some tools how to deal with someone who's verbally defensive, but however not necessarily physically aggressive just yet. Next slide, please. All right. So this is what we call the verbal escalation continuum. There are 5 different stages associated with it. Notice that in the middle of the kite it says the word defensive. I said earlier that there are 4 different stages of the anxiety process: anxiety, defensive, acting out, and then tension reduction. The verbal escalation continuum exists within the defensive stage. All right, and there are 5 different reactions that you could possibly have within the verbal escalation continuum. All right. Next slide, please. Yeah. All right. The first one is questioning. All right. One of the first stages that you'll see in the verbal escalation continuum is questioning. There's 2 different kinds of questions. One is information seeking, and the other one is challenging. All right. So an information seeking question is basically just a rational question seeking a rational response. All right. Simple questions like, where's the front door? Where's the bathroom? How much does it cost? All right, these are rational questions seeking a rational response. And then, next slide, please. The next one is challenging type questions, which is basically not really a question in of itself. It's more of a statement that is meant to challenge your authority, be evasive, or draw you into a power struggle. All right, so anybody here have interactions with challenging individuals? I hate to say this, but teenagers, they're going through that stage, and they're the ones more likely to exhibit challenging type questions. Like, you tell, I want you back by 10 o'clock. Why? Why do I have to be back at 10 o'clock? Why can't I stay until midnight? Right? So again, it's phrased in a question, but it's not really a question, right? It's really just they're challenging your authority. They're trying to draw you into a fight. They're trying to pick a fight with you, basically. All right. So when you're dealing with information seeking type questions, it's simple, right? Just answer the question with a rational response. When you're dealing with challenging type questions, there's really only 2 ways to deal with it. One is to sidestep. All right, sidestep it. So in the case of the teenager who's trying to challenge you, all right, you could say something along the effect of, I'm not here to debate with you why you should come back 10 o'clock. You're coming back 10 o'clock, period. All right, simple statement. You're sidestepping. All right, and then the other one over is to deflect. Right, and deflection often works with people who you have a care and responsibility not to go at them hard, but at the same time, you want to be able to assert your authority. And I think that the second type is the one that probably applies the most over here. So you're dealing with someone, let's use a scenario, the person in the back, they're being disruptive, you've asked them to leave, they say, no, I'm not leaving, all right? You're gonna say, okay, well, if you're not leaving, we're gonna call the police. And then they get into a challenging type question like, who are you to tell me what to do? Or who are you to tell me when to leave? All right. So in this particular case, or perhaps they make a statement that says, I'm not afraid of you. All right. They'll give you that kind of a tone, that kind of a statement. So the second part is basically to deflect it. All right. You can sidestep or you can deflect it. The art of verbal deflection can be coined as, I don't know if you guys have heard the term verbal judo. Yeah, verbal judo. So verbal judo is a form of communication tactic that's often used by police, and it often what's meant to use is strategic uses the word but. All right, but and the intent behind the tactic that you use is to acknowledge your statement and your feeling, but deflect it and reassert your authority. So. Let's use an example. They say, you don't have authority to touch me. You don't have authority to kick me out. All right. You can then reassert yourself by saying, okay, you know what? I acknowledge your feelings. You could say something along the lines of, fine, you don't think that I can have authority to do so, but here is the truth. All right. I do have authority to kick you out under the Trespass to Property Act. All right. You can't make me leave. Actually, you know what? True, I can't physically make you leave, but I'm going to call the police and they're going to make you leave. Right? So again, it's almost like using the word but as a hinge. Right? You acknowledge what they have to say, and you acknowledge their feelings, but you hinge it and you turn it back on them. That's why I call it verbal judo. Judo is basically the art of using someone's force against them. If they're rushing towards you, you use their momentum to throw them down to the ground. Same thing with this thing over here. If they're using an illegitimate challenge, if they're using an illegitimate question, challenging type question, you then use that energy that they've used and use it against them, using the hinge words of but. So, I don't know if we can use one of the videos. Yeah, no, actually, it's going to be on the other. Later on, if we have time, I'll show you a video from a person who sort of coined verbal judo, and then you can see some of the things they use. All right. So let's move on to the next slide, please. All right. So the next part of the verbal escalation continuum is refusal. All right, refusal. So they've gone through with questioning, now they're refusing. They're basically saying, no, I'm not leaving. Right? You can't kick me out. Right? Just flat out refusal. Right? So the response for refusal is something called set limits. Right? I think some of you may have heard that before. Those in childcare, you know exactly what I'm talking about, setting limits. Setting limits is basically telling someone what the outcome is going to be if they don't comply. But however, there's a specific way to do it. All right. When we're setting limits, there's a couple of things. We want to make sure that we provide them with options. Right? Because setting limits is all about, it's almost like a psychological sort of struggle. Setting limits is telling them exactly what's going to happen, but giving them an option or giving them the perception they can choose what happens to them. All right. So in the context of the person who's in the back over there. All right. So you've talked to them, you tell them don't disrupt. They say no, I'm not leaving, so on and so forth. They're refusing, all right? I'm not leaving. You can't make me go, all right? Sir, we need you to leave. You've got really two options. You can quietly walk out on your own. We can have a, productive conversation after the session is over, all right? Or B, we can call the police and they can drag you out, all right? So again, giving them options. However, notice that we give them the positive option first. That's one of the key things about it, is making sure when you're setting limits, you give the positive option first and then you give the negative one. The other one that's key about setting limits is you have to enforce your actions. All right? Otherwise, your credibility goes down the tubes. So in this case, if you say, sir, if you leave quietly, you know what, we'll have a positive conversation. I don't have to involve the police. Nobody has to drag you out. All right? Everything's going to be good. Perhaps we'll have a live and let live attitude. But if you don't, the police are going to come and drag you out. And if they say, fine, call the police. This is where you have to make sure you enforce your actions. As soon as they make that call, okay, we'll call the police. The police are on the way, right? So same thing with all the other interactions as well. You're dealing with a teenager, you tell them to come at 10 o'clock. They say, no, I'm not coming at 10 o'clock. Okay, you know what? If you're not coming at 10 o'clock, all right, your birthday party's canceled, all right? So be it. Okay, cancel it. And then when the birthday party comes, you cancel it. You want to make sure that you enforce those actions, okay? So pop ahead a couple of slides, please. All right. So again, non-compliance, slight loss of rationalization, and then the staff response is, one more slide, set limits. All right. Okay, next slide, please. Release. Release is a fancy word for venting. In this verbal escalation continuum, they've gone through questioning, they've refused. The next part, because you essentially successfully countered all the other parts, is release. Release is basically venting. They're going to do an emotional outburst. In this case, I know it seems counterintuitive, but venting is actually a good thing in this particular case. All right? If they start yelling, they start screaming, they start calling you names, it's actually a good thing, believe it or not. Because release is an emotional pressure valve. And better they release their pent-up energy verbally than physically, because alternatively, they're going to start throwing punches and kicks and stuff like that. We don't want that, right? We don't want to get there. So if they start yelling and screaming and stuff like that, that's actually a good thing. And the intervention is to actually let them vent with some caveats. The caveat being is, A, if it's going to be disruptive for everybody else, try to move them away from the audience, or perhaps try to remove the audience away from them, right? Because the flip side of release is they may not be venting because they just want to let out their emotions. They might be venting because they want to draw attention to themselves. They want to get people on their side. They may be yelling and screaming in order to garner more support, all those things. Those last two is going to be counterproductive for you, all right? Especially in the middle of a park setting where you guys are having a function. They might be yelling and screaming and say, hey, look at these guys, you know, they're all morons and they're all doing this and all that. They may be doing that to actually garner more attention for themselves in order to have backup for themselves. And of course, you don't want that, all right? You want to be able to handle this individual by themselves. So if they are venting just because they're having an emotional outburst, okay, let them vent. But if they are venting because they're trying to gain attention for themselves, they're trying to get more support, get backup, get all those sort of things, you want to definitely stop that right on the spot, all right? So there's two ways of doing it. Either remove the individual from the situation, all right? You can do it verbally, all right? And you can say, you know, what are you shouting at? Like, nobody here is shouting. There's no need for you to shout, all right? Who do you think you're trying to impress over here, right? Have a quiet conversation with the individual and say, hey, if you really want to talk, then let's go over here, let's talk, right? Remove them from the situation. Or if they don't want to go, then if we can, then we'll remove ourselves from the situation as well. So that again, we're not giving them the power to solicit additional help, additional backup, anybody else who might be supporters for them. Right. Forward, a couple slides. So again, verbally acting out, screaming, swearing, high range output, and then the staff intervention is to actually let them. One more slide, please. All right. All right. If possible, remove the audience or the acting out individual from the area, especially if they're there to garner attention for themselves or to solicit support for themselves. All right. One more slide, please. Number 4 is intimidation. This is the one where it gets really, really dangerous for us. All right, we want to be really aware of what's going on because, okay, so they've gone through questioning, they weren't able to get what they want from you, they've gone through the refusal, you set limits, you know, right now they're out of options. They've done the yelling and screaming. All right, so the next step they're going to try to take, or they may take, is going to be intimidation. All right, they're going to get in your face, they're going to, you know, invade your personal bubble, they might threaten you, they might do all kinds of things. All right. Intimidation needs to be taken seriously, all right? Even if they just, you know, are playing at it per se, it needs to be taken seriously. So this brings us to a couple of conversations. One is personal safety, all right? If they say something controversial, something provocative, like, you know what, I'm going to hurt you, all right? Okay, now's the time for us to look at our personal space, take a look at the safety of the people around us. You know, do we have you know, enough space for us to be able to escape an attack? Are there barriers in front of us? Again, we'll touch on it in a minute. All those sort of things. All right. Second thing also is to consider the actual intimidation itself, what they're saying, how they're saying it, because uttering threats, believe it or not, is a crime under certain circumstances. There's only 3 things that could constitute a crime under the criminal code. Is uttering threats, meaning I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to break your arm, I'm going to hit you in the head, all those sort of things. That is a crime, all right? Uttering a threat to threaten harm to you is a crime. Second one is threatening to kill you. I'm going to kill you, I'm going to stab you, I'm going to run you over with a car, all right? That is a crime in of itself, all right? Last one, believe it or not, is threatening to harm your pet and or damage your property. I'm going to burn your house down. I'm going to shoot your dog. That is also a crime. So in the context of uttering threats or under intimidation, we have to remember that what actually is a crime, what is not a crime. If they've crossed the line and it's a crime, okay, easy peasy, call the police. All right? And then when the police come, yeah, he said this to me. All right, and then, you know, so it's pretty cut and dry response. Now, where it becomes challenging is some of the in-between stuff. Some people are aware of the law. Maybe they've gotten a couple of scrapes with the police, so on and so forth. All right, they make veiled threats. They say things like, I'll be back for you, all right? Or, you know, wait till I see you next time, or something along those lines. That statement in and of itself cannot be constituted as a threat because they didn't actually say, all right, what they said. But however, still, you can tell the undertones is going to be a threat. There's a couple of options for you over here. You can say, I'm sorry, what'd you say? All right, you're going to come back? What do you come back for? All right. You could try to call them out, but again, that's a bit of a tricky road, right? You're sort of escalating instead of de-escalating, all right? I think probably the more safest answer is say, you know what, sir? I don't know exactly what you're intending to say, but however, I just took what you said as a threat, all right? And so therefore, I would like for you to leave, all right? We're going to call the police. That's probably the better step for you guys, as opposed to trying to escalate, all right? So again, you know, next slide, please. So when someone is intimidating, they're basically either verbally or non-verbally threatening you in some shape, form, or manner, all right? And then the staff response is to take it seriously and take measures in order to protect yourself. Next slide, please. All right. If you need to seek assistance, bring in additional witnesses. I was talking with a gentleman earlier, and he's talking about additional witnesses and stuff like that. This is where the positive witness will come in. All right, have additional people around you who can actually see what happened, hear what happened, and then later on, if it does become a legal issue, then you have positive witnesses available for you to be able to testify in court. All right, they can say, if whether you're the defendant or whatever the case might be, they could testify on your behalf and say, you know what, in this situation, I saw this, and then they become the positive witness that you need. Okay, all right. Tension reduction is the last one. So once again, we're going now on the down scale of the emotional and crisis sort of intervention scale. Tension reduction, as we mentioned earlier, is restoration of rationality. They're starting to regain their rationality. They're starting to think clearly again. All of a sudden they realize, oh boy, okay. So that could happen anytime. See, unfortunately, it deals a lot with human psychology. Every person is different. Our psychology is made up of everything from our biological components to our environment, how we were raised, all those sort of things. So there's no cut and dry way for us to define who's going to do what at certain times. But you can usually tell someone is in tension reduction because all of a sudden they realize, I'm in a boo-boo. This is bad, right? This could happen whether you say something relevant to them and they suddenly realize, oh, I made a mistake, or it could happen when they're in handcuffs, either one, right? But tension reduction eventually happens, and again, as I was mentioning earlier, tension reduction, has to be managed appropriately. Otherwise, it could raise the situation back up into an escalation situation, and then it becomes physical, and we don't want that, right? So, as I was mentioning earlier, 2 slides, please. Mentioned earlier is a drop in energy, and then the staff response is restore the supportive approach through establishing therapeutic rapport. All right. So in this particular case over here, reestablishing rapport is restore that sort of supportive approach that you were using earlier, lower your communications, talk to them in a rational manner, make sure your tone and voice and the way you say what you say is also appropriate for the situation. But at the same time, we're not relinquishing our authority. We're still the authority here, all right? And this is really a good time for us to be able to communicate with the person and say, hey, listen, something happened for you to get to this crisis level. Something happened for you to refuse or ask me, challenging questions, or perhaps even vent, yell, scream, all those sort of things. All right. If you're interested, let's have a real reasonable conversation afterwards, so we can talk about it. We can prevent this thing from happening in the future. This is sort of the good time for it. Okay.
Question.
Yeah, please go ahead, sir.
If I'm looking at that, obviously it's rational for us to expect to be able to short circuit that continuum. If we respond properly, say at level 2,
Yep.
that it would go to tension with
Yep.
without having to go through to a fully
Yep, absolutely. And you actually jumped to the point that I was getting to. So right now, what we see here in the verbal escalation continuum, it looks linear, right? It goes from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, right? In real life, it's not. It doesn't go there. It all depends on the individual you're dealing with. It depends on our reaction, the situation, a whole lot of factors that are out of our control. So in reality, when we're talking about the verbal escalation continuum, there is no linear progress. All right, depending on the individual. Okay, so for a rational individual who, still has some sort of rationality, or perhaps they have a conscience, they may go from questioning and it just stops, right? Doesn't go any further. You provide them with a rational answer, and then when they do a challenging type question, you shut them down right away. They realize, okay, you know what, there's nowhere for me to go. Best thing for me to leave, because I don't want this to escalate. For someone who has been in trouble with the law before, or perhaps they spent time in the system, they may skip refusal and release. They go straight to intimidation, right? The challenging type question doesn't work on you, and so therefore they go right to your intimidation, because that's what they're used to. In prison, that's what they do. They skip all the nice stuff. They go right to intimidation. They say, oh yeah, you kick me out. Watch what happens. Because that's what they're used to. That's how they're built. All right. So again, there's no linear process, unfortunately. But however, the staff response to each one of them should be consistent between all of them. Okay. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay. All right. One other thing to just quickly talk about. It's not on this slide. It's on the other slide. But something that's called peaks and valleys. When you're engaged in the verbal escalation continuum, sometimes, especially during release, during venting, if the individual is really sort of on the high end of their negative emotions, they're yelling, they're screaming, they're verbally arguing with you, they're in what we call a peak. all right? Their negative emotions are at its peak, and right now they aren't receptive to anything you have to say, nor are they ready to shut up, for lack of a better term. In this particular situation, it's virtually impossible for us to try to talk sense to them. It's kind of like a toddler. I'm going back to my wife's line of work. It's like a toddler. When a toddler is screaming, and you ever, sorry, this sounds bad. Walmart, right? You hear the child that's screaming, from the 12 aisles away. That child wants just to scream at that point. All right? Regardless of whatever precipitated that screaming, at that point the child is screaming. Nothing mom or dad will say or do could appease that child. They just want to scream. All right? So that's really what we call the peak and peak of their emotional sort of continuum. However, at some point that peak will drop. Right? Because as human beings, we're not able to maintain that high level of energy for long. It's really tiring, right? Even for the toddler. All right? Well, the toddler can scream for, maybe 2, 3, 4 hours, but at some point, their energy is going to peter out, and then they're going to drop into what's called a valley. So for us as people, staff members who are dealing with someone who's going through like verbal intervention or going through crisis, the easiest way to get to them, the easiest way to catch someone who's going to be remotely rational is wait until their energy drops down to the valley, and then we can speak with them. Because otherwise, it's really just a shouting contest. Going to the scenario of the toddler, if they're screaming, talking to them isn't going to do it. It's just two heads butting together. But if we wait until the toddler actually, has lowered their energy, that's probably the best time to do it. So same thing with a person, who's disrupting the church service or, doing whatever they're doing. If they're yelling, screaming, doing whatever, they're actively arguing with you, trying to talk sense to them at that particular moment is probably not going to be as effective. But at some point, their energy is going to drop because we can't keep it up forever. When their energy finally drops and they're stopping to take a breath, that's probably the best time for us to be able to try to insert some rationality and talk to them at that point. Now, we need to be careful, of course, because, again, when they drop into there, they may be somewhere between refusal and release. They may not have gone to intimidation. They may be sort of partially in attention reduction, but again, we need to use a supportive approach because we can't just jump on them at that point and then try to inject ourselves in a sort of aggressive way because it'll bring them right back up. So again, say something neutral like, how are you feeling? Are you okay? Are you understanding what we're trying to say over here? Rather than coming in and saying, okay, you know what? Your intention reduction, I've got you now. Get out before I drag you out. Because that'll, again, bring you right back up to the top of the escalation scale. Okay. All right, so that's it for verbal intervention. Any questions so far? Yes, please.
I just was curious in regards to what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it kind of complicated that it could become across like a dismissal? Like if someone was, starting to de-escalate it, and you say like, well, we'll talk about this later. Like I've done that with my kids.
Right.
It's like a dismissal.
It can be taken as a dismissal, absolutely. It can potentially escalate, so that's why you have to read the situation over there. If there's opportunity to talk about it right now, for sure, but however, there's no opportunity to talk about it right now, then you do have to talk about it later. And it's all the delivery of it's what I find, is that, okay, I understand you're going through something right now. I don't, unfortunately, have the opportunity to talk to you, but however, I would love to talk to you about it later. Right? The delivery is going to be really important here. That's where, again, the supportive approach comes in, is moderating your voice, making sure the person understands what you're saying, trying to inject some sort of rationality back into the person. How you deliver it is going to be really key to whether they receive that or not. Remember earlier about the encoding and decoding? When they're in that state, their decoding mechanisms are not quite functioning as well as they need to, and so we need to keep the language fairly simple, and then we also need to use certain tactics to be able to make sure they understand. Like, we probably don't want to say, do you understand? But, you use some other neutral language to say, do you get what I'm saying right now? Right? We will talk about it for sure, just not right now. Right? Just, again, use that supportive approach. Hopefully that makes sense? Okay, fantastic. All right. So I think that's it for verbal interventions. I guess we'll go back. Yeah, we'll go back to the original. Yeah. So we're just jumping back to the other slide deck, because we'll.
Coming up.
Yep.
It's got to warm up.
Okay. So the next part of the presentation will focus on personal safety, because I remember, situations are dynamic. We oftentimes don't have control over how the other person is going to react. There are some generalizations that we talk about here, especially with the verbal escalation continuum, crisis management, all those sort of things. But depending on the individual, it may or may not work for them. And so that's why I want to make sure that the personal safety is also part of this presentation as well. Hopefully we'll never get there, but however, it's in my business at least, it's better to have and not need, and to need and suddenly not have, right? So I want to make sure this is sort of captured in it as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yep, keep going. Yep, keep going. And the next one as well. All right, peaks and valleys we talked about. Yeah. All right, so when we talk about personal safety. All right, one more slide, please. All right, I'll start off with something called Cooper's Color Code, or the Threat Awareness Spectrum. This is something that's largely taught to police officers, but I want to share with you guys as well, because it's important for us to be aware. Cooper's Color Code basically talks about our awareness spectrum, our ability to be able to detect threats. All right, there's 5 different ones on the screen over here. All right, they've sort of narrowed it down to, or simplified it into a color code in order to describe the various states of consciousness that you might be in. White, or the white color code is what they would use to coin an unprepared and unready state. A good example of someone who's in sort of a Cooper's Code white is someone who's sleeping, all right? But there's other ways as well that we could be in potentially white stage, all right? So for us to be aware, for us to be cognizant of potential threats, or perhaps whatever's going on around us, we need all of our senses. We need to hear, we need to see, we need to smell, we need to feel, we do all those things, all right? Things that could potentially remove our ability to be able to detect those things could be impediments to our ability to see and detect. So our phones, all right? We're tied to our phones. Sometimes, if we're not doing anything, we're busy looking at our phones. When we're looking at our phones, where's our attention gathered? To the device, absolutely, right? So you're looking here, you're not looking here. You're also listening to whatever's on the phone itself. You're watching a funny family video. You're watching a dog video or something like that. Dogs doing funny tricks and stuff. You're captured on there. You're not looking around you, all right? Same thing with earbuds. Right, so if you're listening to music, you're walking down the street, maybe you're doing some exercises, it's great. You know what? You're walking to music, you're getting into it, you're all pumped. The only challenge is you're removing one of your senses. If someone is running up behind you, you're not going to hear it. All right? So condition white isn't just necessarily limited to you being asleep. There are things in our life that we're doing right now which could potentially put us in condition white, even though we're not necessarily, deliberately doing so. Right? Condition yellow. All right. Right now we're in condition yellow. Right now as we speak right now, because we're paying attention. We're aware of what's going on. You know what's on your left. You know what's on your right. You know what's behind you. If the door opens, you'll hear it. You'll be aware. This is basically yellow. You're not panicking. You're not prepared for some sort of threat. But however, you are alert. You are relaxed. All right. You are in a good situation awareness sort of situation. Orange is. Okay, now something has happened. So, for example, someone throws a rock through the window, or someone starts screaming out in the lobby, or something along those lines. This is where it raises your level of attention to orange. All right, you suddenly become aware of a potential threat, not necessarily directed at you, but however, it is a potential threat. You're aware of it, and you turn your head towards that direction. You're essentially getting ready for it. Red is what we call action mode. All right, so the threat is now focused on you. The person that was yelling out in the lobby comes into the room and starts screaming, "I'm going to kill you all!" Or the rock, thrown through, and somebody else does additional actions, and you suddenly become aware of the fact that the threat is directed towards you or directed at the people around you. The last one is the one that we definitely don't want to be in, is panic. And it is possible. So when fear affects us, it affects us in many ways. Could affect us in a positive way, could affect us in a negative way. One of the ways that fear, you've heard the term fight or flight. All right, that's sort of an instinctive reaction on how human beings react to fear. The one that they don't talk about is fear or freeze. All right, so fight or flight, and the third one that we don't talk about is freeze. It is possible for someone who is so afraid to be frozen in place.
Has anybody ever encountered somebody who has been so afraid that they've just sort of frozen? Yeah, absolutely. And for the most part, this is kind of sad, but for the most part, it's children who freeze in place because they haven't yet developed the emotional safeguards and ability to be able to control their emotions. And if they encounter something that's absolutely overwhelming to them, they could potentially freeze in place. And that's one of the worst places to want to be. So basically, it's panic, breakdown of physical and mental performance. You are not able to respond to the threat at all. So how do we avoid then staying in white and in black? Because obviously the three that we want to, the three sort of awareness settings that we want to find ourselves are either yellow, orange, or red. We don't want to keep ourselves in red because again, that's very tiring, not to mention it makes us paranoid. We also don't want to be in orange because it's the same thing. Yellow is probably one of the best places to be in, especially in the context of a seemingly safe environment like the one we're in right now. All right, so we're not panicking, we're not afraid, we're not aware of any threats just yet, but however, we're still awake, we're alert, we're prepared if something happens, all right? And then if something does come to our attention, potential threat, we then switch to orange, switch to red. Now, the reason why they put this color code together, because as human beings, maybe soldiers can, if you're properly sort of conditioned, but it's very difficult for us as people to be able to switch from some of the extremes to a ready mode right away. Like, for example, if we're sleeping, we can't jump up ready to fight in a split second when someone, bursts through the window or kicks down our door. It takes time, maybe even 30 seconds for us to rub the sleep out of our eyes, get up, be prepared, all those sort of things, right? You have to be, quite well steeped into responding to threats like soldiers do in order to be able to get up in a short period of time. And so because it's difficult for us to be able to switch these emotional or response phases, it's important for us to stay within each of these phases because it's usually a progression. So it's much easier for us to go from yellow to orange to red than it is from white to red or white to orange. Right? And so what they're using the color code for then is for us to maintain awareness of potential threats so that when and if a threat does become present to us, then we can respond that much more prepared, much more quickly. So in the context of the person who's disturbing in the back over there, all right, we want to make sure that we're not distracted. People aren't touching us from behind. We're having a direct conversation with the individual. We're not busy trying to shake hands with somebody else. Our attention isn't taken away because we just met the individual. We don't know what his intentions are or her intentions are. We don't know what, we don't have a screening method to detect whether they have a knife or a gun. We're essentially in condition white. If we allow someone else to take our attention away, then we're truly is in condition white. Instead, we want to focus on the individual, stay on condition yellow, all right? We're not panicking, we're not afraid of them per se, but we are watching them, we're watching what's going on, we're seeing how they're reacting, we're looking at their facial features, all the proxemics, all those sort of things, and we are ready in case something does happen. If they start getting hostile, we then move the condition yellow. If they brandish a weapon, they start yelling and screaming, we move the condition red, and it's that much easier to do so. Because obviously we don't want to go into condition black, which means we're so panicked, we're so unprepared for what's going on that we freeze like, children do. All right. Next slide, please. All right. So reactionary gap. So the use of distance. Distance is when police officers are being trained, security people are being trained, distance is the one sort of lifesaver which gives us three things: time to think, time to react, and time to get out of the way. All right. So when we talk about reactionary gap, this is the distance between you and a potential attacker, especially if they have a weapon, all right, which will allow you to gain all three or at least some of the three. All right, time to react, time to get out of the way, so on and so forth. All right. And of course, reactionary gap has to be an appropriate and comfortable space between you and an aggressive person. All right. Depending on your level of training, depending on your comfort. Jane, can I borrow you for a second, please, honey? Thank you. All right. So I'm the bad guy because I'm a really good bad guy. All right. So as I mentioned earlier with proxemics and stuff like that, if I'm the bad guy and I advance towards her and she senses that I'm a bad guy, she will then back off. But how far back should she go? Any thoughts, any considerations? 2 steps? Okay, yeah. Any other thoughts? Until you feel comfortable? Yeah, absolutely. All right. So sort of mentally play this out in your head. How long would it take for an attacker to reach you in 1 second? Any thoughts? 1 second, yeah, 1 second. How long would it take? So how far can an attacker go in 1 second? 10 feet, yeah, all right. So in 1 second, I'm here, all right. And that puts me in a complete danger zone to Zen. Okay, thanks, honey. All right. All right. 1 second could potentially put me in danger zone because 1 second is all I have to be able to react to it. All right. So when police officers are being trained, they actually have a sort of a ground rule, although sometimes it's been taken out of context. They actually say 21 feet. 21 feet. Because for them, they did a study. If you take a look at the bottom left-hand corner, in 1983, somebody by the name of Sergeant Dallas Tueller over the Salt Lake Police Department examined the distance that's needed for a police officer to be safe in the sense that they have time to be able to draw their sidearm and negate the target for a person who's holding a knife. And they determined that it actually takes them 21 feet in order to be able to safely do what they have to do to defend themselves against someone with a knife. Because the assailant could cross 21 feet in 1.5 seconds. All right. Now that said, the 21-foot rule has been sort of maybe too broadly applied because the rule has a number of drawbacks. All right, couple of things. A, it's based on someone who's actually ready. So the officer's engaging with the individual, they're talking to them, all of a sudden they see them pull a knife. Now you have the 21-foot advantage. All right. Doesn't it take other factors into consideration? So, barriers, distractions, maybe other people, milling about, all those sort of a thing. All right. So it doesn't take that into account. It's too controlled of a situation for them to be able to apply 21 feet at all times. All right. And then the last drawback is action always beats reaction. So the person who's actually reacting, the person who's the attacker, who's the aggressor, they will have the advantage because they moved first. You have to move double the amount of speed in order for them to be able to get to you, all right? So, however, 21 feet is kind of odd, all right? So, Jen, can I borrow you a second? I'll get you to stand on the green X. 21 feet is roughly this far, all right? So is this a good distance to have a conversation with someone? Probably not, all right? And it's kind of awkward for her. Okay, so I'm the bad guy, and she says, no, you stay over here. I'm going to talk to you from over there because I think you're a bad guy. That kind of escalates things a little bit. All right, thanks, honey. All right, so should we apply the 21 foot all the time? No, not all the time, but it all depends on the situation. Again, remember, we're talking about proxemics earlier on. A good distance for a sort of casual conversation between yourself and a stranger is roughly 6 feet. All right, so 6 feet's not bad. 6 feet's right over here. So if I'm talking to Lorraine, this is not a bad space. This is a little bit too close, unless I'm really good friends with her. But this is about right for a stranger. All right. However, if that person starts exhibiting hostile tendencies, you see it in their facial reaction, hearing what they say, this may be a good time to start backing off a little bit. All right. And then we'll talk about barriers and escape routes in just a minute as well. All right. So this is where you start thinking about a reactionary gap. By the time the person produces a weapon or utterly threatens you, like, I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to kill you, this is the time where you might want to start, okay, let's start really back off. Let's do that 21-foot thing, all right? Because I want to make sure that I'm safe. Next slide, please. Indicators of attack, all right? So again, we're talking about body language. There are a few things that this is not a comprehensive list, not an exhaustive list, but there are a whole bunch of things that you can sort of look at when we're talking about indicators of attack. Blading of the body, all right? So someone who's getting ready to attack, they may or may not stand full on to you. They may be blading their body a little bit, all right? Favoring the side that's strong. The side that's strong is usually the one that's behind, all right? The lead hand is usually the jab hand or the one that's going to be used to distract. All right, so they turn the body 45 degrees. Hand postures, all right? Remember we were talking about hand postures earlier, reaching for things behind them, reaching for things inside of their jacket, crossing their arms, signifying they're not really interested in what you have to say, all those sort of things, all right? Tense muscles. Muscles in the jaw, if they're getting angry, clench up, all right? How their eyes look as well, they're clenching up as well. Clenched fists, another one, all right? Skin tone. Flush skin, so as if they're getting ready to attack, they're getting ready to get physical, their emotions will cause their heart to increase. And when they increase, they're going to breathe harder and deeper. They're getting ready to get physical with you. When that happens, it's going to be difficult to see in someone with swarthier skin, darker skin, etc. But for lighter skinned individuals, it's really easy to see that perhaps you'll start seeing a flushed skin, by the neck or perhaps the face, that sort of a thing. All right. I mentioned earlier, if they're getting ready to get into action, their breathing may increase. All right. Instead of normal breathing. all right? They're starting to get into a little bit more heavier breathing, increased rate, because again, they're getting ready to attack, all right? Gross extremity movement, some people exhibit their stress, through certain types of activity. Perhaps as they're talking, they start, that their movement become much more just sharp, much more articulated, rather than, using gentle movements like they start going, you, and, jabbing movements and stuff like that, or perhaps, smacking their fist against their palm, almost in a sort of intimidation. That's something that we want to be aware of as well, all right? And then eye contact is another one, all right? So target glance, if they're looking at you normally, you can tell from the expression that they're really just having a conversation. But if they start doing that hard stare, all right, like they're gonna eat you, yeah, that's called what they call target glance. The other one is called 1,000-yard stare. 1,000-yard stare is something that not everybody does, but has anybody ever looked at you and he's looking through me? Yeah, that's what they call 1,000-yard stare. Right. Not everybody has the ability to do that, but when someone starts looking at you and then you combine that with other factors, like for example, they're starting to clench their fist and they're looking right through you, these again, the combination of these ones are indicators of something not quite right going on. They're not here to play patty cake with you. Right. Last but not least, no eye contact. For some folks, it might be no eye contact. They might be looking at the floor. All right. They're scheming up a different way to be able to attack you. Perhaps they're looking over left, looking right, but still. Other body languages, signs will tell you that this person is starting to think about something. All right. Signs of caution, prolonged, intense stare. If they're staring at you and they're gritting their teeth and they're looking like they just want to take a strip off of you, that's definitely a sign of caution. Hostile facial expressions, well, we know about facial expressions. We know exactly what that looks like. Aggressive gestures, poking, jabbing, all right, pointing, smacking their fists, so on and so forth. Tone of voice, from just a normal tone of voice to much more louder, sharper, maybe using sarcasm. All right. Physical posturing, we mentioned about blading in the body, center landing, closed fist, etc. And then when it gets into the invasion of personal space, that is intimidation. They're trying to intimidate you, obviously. All right. They take a step towards you, and they're in your personal bubble. Yeah, that's intimidation. Next slide, please. All right, so let's just use this room as an example, all right? We may not always have 21 feet, all right? So I'm gonna borrow Jen again, I'm sorry. I'm using you as I have to pay you afterwards. All right, can I get you to have a seat over there? Yeah, for sure, all right. Okay, so if you're dealing with someone here, we don't always have the luxury of 21 feet, all right? What happens then if you don't have the 21 feet that we're looking for? Actually, get you to stand up, please. I'll be the bad guy. Okay. All right. So I'm the bad guy. Jen is coming to me. I'm being disruptive, and she's trying to tell me, please be nice and all that stuff. And however, you know what? The stage blocks her exit. All right. And I'm getting aggressive. I'm starting to ball up my fist. I'm always doing those things. What are other ways she could use, or other things in the environment we can use to be able to help her? All right. Two things. Thanks, honey. One is barriers, all right? So what constitutes a barrier? Barrier basically is any object that could either delay or stop an attacker from getting towards you. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a thick wall and a locked door. It could be anything. It could be just a temporary barrier. These pews, these chairs could form a barrier, all right? So if Jen was here and I'm over here, it takes time for me to get across. I can't get to her in the 1.5 seconds. I have to go around this first, all right? So that's a potential barrier. Right. The stand here could also be a potential barrier as well, provided, of course, I can't move it. If the person is big and strong, they pick up the thing and throw it at me, then it becomes sort of a moot point. But however, any one of these things, that's essentially an immovable object, or an object that's very hard to move, that could potentially create a barrier between you and someone. So when you're dealing with someone, they're starting to exhibit hostile signs, all right, this might be a good time. If you can't create the 21-foot distance, this might be a good time for me just to slide over and put that bench in front of me before me and that person, all right? Another good one is having witnesses. Earlier, someone mentioned witnesses. In addition to being a positive witness and being able to testify in court, having additional people around you will then signal to the hostile individual that people are now watching. All right, he or she has to be really careful what they do, because, well, especially if they've been in previous scrapes of the law, they'll recognize these people will testify against me. All right, and then I'm going to be in hot water. And so bringing the additional witnesses will then help, make them think twice. Because usually in the context of criminal behavior, and sorry, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into criminal psychology. There's a number of criminology theories, including something called the routine activities theory. Routine activities theory says 3 things have to be present for someone to decide to commit a crime. 1 is means, 2 is motivation, and then 3 is opportunity. All right, means, motive, opportunity. So we can't really do anything about means and motive because that's personally generated. All right, so if the person comes in here and they have a motive to disrupt and they have the means to do so because they brought with them a stick or a weapon or something along those lines, we can't really do anything about that. We could install airport-style screening devices, but that's not really welcoming for a church. All right, somebody has to get strip searched before they come into the place. That's not going to work, right? So unfortunately, we can't control that. What can we control? We can control opportunity. Opportunity is largely something that we have a little bit of control over. We don't have full control, but at least some control over. And so therefore, when you bring in the witnesses, they have to make a mental sort of calculation. Can I do this? Can I get away with this? And they have to think twice before they take action. All right. If I act in an unreasonable manner, it's going to be recorded. Other people are going to see it. Other people are going to testify against it. If I get dragged out, there's no recourse for me. I'm going to lose. And that's what it's all about. I'm going to lose. All right, so they have to mentally calculate, can I do this, can I not do this? All right, certainly makes them think twice. Last but not least, all right, so we talked about barriers, talked about witnesses. The last one over here, against someone who is a committed attacker, and please God, don't ever let it happen here. But if we have someone who is a dedicated attacker who is committed to what they have to do, the last one is an escape route. We want to make sure we have an escape route. It's important, especially in a space like this, we're aware of where the doors are, whether they're open, whether they're closed. If we're interacting with someone who is not quite right, we want to make sure that our back is to the door. All right. So let's use this stage as an example. If this stand was a hostile individual, which is the safest space for me? Here, where I don't really have any place to go, or here, where I could potentially escape towards that way or that way, which is probably the safest one, where I am right now, absolutely, all right? So if you're interacting with someone who's potentially hostile, one of the things we want to think about is, where's my back? Is there an exit to it? Can I get out if this thing goes south? And then if I don't have one, can I maneuver myself in such a way in order to get there? All right. And it may or may not clue into the person, but however, you're aware of it, and if you start maneuvering yourself, they may clue in as well. Hopefully, it'll discourage them because they'll think, oh, okay, the person's already making an exit for themselves. But however, if they're not aware of it, at least you're ready. Ideally, if they recognize that you're feeling threatened and you're starting to make an exit for yourselves, maybe they'll restore some sense of rationality and they'll lower their temperature and start to behave in a semi-reasonable manner. I don't count on it because at this we don't know who it is. We don't know what their motivations are. We don't know what kind of self-control they have. But at least we've taken positive action for ourselves to make sure that if the threat looks serious enough in front of me, I'm going to make sure I get myself in a position to be able to escape if we have to. All right. So again, make sure you have an escape behind you, a door or some sort of exit that you can leave this particular premise or leave the situation. Next slide, please. All right. Any questions so far about personal safety? Yes, please.
If you're dealing with someone verbally, just one-on-one, it's best to keep it one-on-one if there's not a threat. Because sometimes other people will come over.
Yep.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing initially, especially if you don't maintain civil conversation. Because again, if it's a one-on-one, then you can go about there and say, okay, so it's, again, use a scenario of the person who's disrupting in the back. One person, an usher, goes back there and says, hello, sir, I'm so-and-so. You recognize this is a peaceful church service. We'd appreciate if you lower your voice, or if you have any comments to make, please make them after the service. Our pastor would be happy to talk to you, or one of our ushers would be happy to hear you out. But right now you're disturbing everybody else, and we'd like to be able to enjoy this service in a service in a peaceful manner, all right? If they accept that, that's great, all the better. If they refuse to do so, now is a really good time for you to be able to bring additional witnesses in. This is where sort of advanced plans would be good. Although in a situation like this, if someone is disruptive in the back, more than one of the ushers will be aware of what's going on. You might, in advance, decide who's going to confront the individual, or at least speak to the individual, but all the others will be ready to converge if the thing goes, further towards escalation.
Okay, you would go and sometimes go the other way, if other people come over, that then the person feels threatened and being ganged up on.
Absolutely. That's why I say initially, while the discourse is still reasonable and civil, one person would be good. But when the person starts escalating and they start saying no and refusing and arguing and challenging and stuff like that, then you raise the stakes as well. Essentially, again, you want to create the impression in their head that you're not going to roll over, right? You still want to maintain that authority. And then when they suddenly realize, oh, you know what? I've upped the stakes. They've upped the stakes. This is not going to end well for me. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay. All right. Yes, please. Mm-hmm. Yep. So there's a couple of pieces to that. One is recording is allowed in public places without someone's permission. So if you're in a park, whatever, it's considered a public place, so they can do so. But however, on private property like this, you could tell them, I'm sorry, sir, there's no recording here. You can tell them to put it away. And if they refuse to do so, then all of a sudden they're contravening the Trespass Property Act. All right. Here, some people actually put up signs on certain properties, certain office buildings, or whatever the case might be, that personal recording is not allowed. In the context of a law, personal recordings might be allowed as long as one party is consenting. It's called a one-party consent. All right. So in this case over here, he or she might say, well, I consent to the recording. I'm going to do recording whether I want to or not. However, they're doing so on private property. And on private property, consistently, the courts have said, you know what, if you're on somebody else's property, you have to follow their rules, which makes sense. All right? If I come to your house, I can't just do whatever I want. All right? So you have to follow your rules. So saying that this is your house. And so if you set the rules saying, no, I'm sorry, video recordings are not allowed over here, then essentially you've established a law. If they contravene that, it's trespassing, you can take it then to the next step. Okay? All right. Any other questions? Oh, 5 minutes left, sorry. All right, so church security. So just one additional slide with church security. So it's somewhat sad to say, but however, you know what, there's a lot of good professionals out there who are looking at this particular issue. Once upon a time, and I'm sort of dating myself by saying this, once upon a time, a church was a place of solace, it was a place of sanctitude, and it was a place of reverence. You do not do that sort of a thing in church. Right? You take off your hat, you behave well, I don't care who you are. Even if you're 5 years old, this is church. You want to mess around, God's going to come get you. All right? But that reverence is gone, sadly. All right? And so, yeah, people have lost that sense of reverence. They've lost that respect for God. And so we have yet to sort of turn the corner on this one. But however, at the same time, this has really prompted professionals to put together some guidelines on how to protect the places that was once sanctified, like this place over here. So I belong to an organization called ACES International, and they basically sort of the premier organization with regard to physical security. That's why I pursued the certifications for them and stuff like that. One of the really good things they produce is something called Securing Houses of Worship around the world. And again, they're an impartial organization. They're not affiliated with any religious denomination or whatever, but they really want to restore that reverence and sanctity, at least the safety of churches and mosques and synagogues and stuff like that. And they put together a really, really good guideline. This is sort of an excerpt of that. And they've broken down the various security pieces into a number of different sections, including interior security, exterior security, procedural best practices, and stuff like that. So one of the key things, of course, is access control. All right, so if we don't allow the bad guy into the facility, then it helps to reduce some of your risk. One of the key things they talk about is making sure that this church has a lot of entrances and exits. Some of them are dedicated exits, some of them are dedicated entrances, or maybe both. Especially if we're opening up the facility to outside people coming in, it might be a good idea to limit those, create choke points in order to limit who comes in. That way you can always see who's coming in. And usually those doors are manned by an usher. and the ushers can then eyeball someone who's coming in. Of course, we want to maintain this to be an open environment. We want to be welcoming because we're Christians. We don't want to, block somebody out just because. But however, there are some key things that we want to watch out for. If someone's coming in with a duffel bag that's this big and looks like it's very heavy, yeah, we want to ask, who's that in the duffel bag, right? Because unfortunately, in the States, the duffel bag is actually full of guns, right? Most people coming in, they will be carrying no more than maybe, a backpack or a purse or something along those lines. Those, whatever. Well, a backpack could have a gun and everything else, but at least, it's not obviously a danger. Second thing of all is if anybody has been trespassed from the property, it's a good idea for the ushers to be aware of who that person is and maybe what their face looks like, and then, mentally be prepared if that person shows up, especially, if they're showing up with their friends and stuff like that. Another thing also is people showing up with, protesters, they like to bring placards or signs or, other implements of their protest. They might even bring a bullhorn or something like that. Things like that are obvious to you, you might be, if you reduce the amount of access points, you can then control what comes in and what comes out, right? Alarm systems. So after hours, when nobody's here, everybody's home, the church becomes a bit of an empty place. But still, it's physically here. And for people who have a bit of a grudge against it, they might decide to take action against the property itself. Breaking windows, spray painting, vandalism, burning flags, all those sort of things. All right. So in this particular case, what's most important? Probably what's inside the church. Right? So all this is beautiful, right? It's a lovely place. We don't want it to be burnt. We don't want it to be vandalized. We don't want somebody in and doing things that we don't want them to do. So an alarm system can really help with that one, all right? If you guys have an alarm system, good for you. Make sure you guys, control the codes. Now, the systems that we're talking about are really great, but in addition to having the systems themselves, it's also really important to make sure you maintain them. Maintain the alarm codes, maintain the procedures in place, liaising with the alarm company to make sure that, the proper people are being called, all those sort of things, all right? Camera system, I noticed there's some cameras in the outside, which is great. Camera systems do one of three things. One is it deters crime. Somebody who's thinking about doing something bad on the outside, they will see the cameras, they'll think, you know what? Again, weigh the risk versus rewards. Is it worthwhile for me to spray paint that wall when the camera catches me, the police are going to send me to jail, right? Maybe I shouldn't. Right? If no camera there, however, okay, I can get away with it, then I'm going to do it, right? Same thing with breaking into cars, stealing from the church, breaking and entering, stealing, all that sort of thing, right? Cameras and alarms, they serve as a deterrent, and they help to be able to dissuade people who are maybe not as convinced to do so. Second thing is, if the deterrence fails from the camera system, then it becomes an actual device for you to record and be able to present evidence, right? Deterrence doesn't always work, right? Some people might be, really committed to it. They might know the camera is here, but they've disguised themselves in such a way they think they're going to be able to get it with it. They're going to do it anyways. So this is where the camera comes in. You can actually see video, record it, present it as evidence. The police nowadays are actually quite good. They have software to be able to sort of figure out who you are and what your face looks like, even if you're wearing a disguise. Sometimes you see on CP24, a hooded figure with a face mask and maybe sunglasses and stuff like that, and they're, doing whatever they're doing. You think, how did the cops catch them, right? Well, because they have a number of ways of doing it. A, they have technology to be able to sort of almost peel back the layers. Second is the person is usually wearing a consistent set of clothing. Maybe they're driving the same car. They'll be using cameras along the way on the path of escape. So if someone spray painted this wall over here and they're wearing a disguise and they jump into a car, the cops will look at the car and say, okay, you know what, it's a blue Pontiac or it's a blue Chevy or something along those lines. I'm going to start canvassing cameras down the street this way. I'm going to start looking for places that might have other cameras because I want to start looking for that blue car. Once I start finding that blue car, I'm going to want to see who the occupant is. Maybe they've taken their mask off by then. Maybe they've taken the hood off by then. And they'll expand that search within kilometers, 2, 3, 4, 5, depending on the level of the crime. And at some point, they will get a picture of the person who does not have a mask on, does not have a hood on, and they'll be able to identify them. All right? So that's where the camera's value comes in. All right? And then establish higher security areas, like for example inside the church, there's certain areas that are a little bit, it's called zoning. So establishing a little bit higher security areas where there's going to be additional security required, everything from daycares, church office where the money is, anything else where there's valuables, all that sort of thing. Establish a little bit of a sort of a barrier, not a barrier, sort of layers between the outside and the inside, right? Exterior security considers CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. It's a fairly broad concept. Basically, it's using the outside environment to deter crime. Little things like, creating open sight lines, reducing isolation, all those sort of things are part of SEPTED. We can go into that a little more because, well, good or bad, I'm not done with you guys yet. I'm not leaving today and then just leaving you alone. I'm going to continue to work with Lorraine on some of your security issues and maybe making some recommendations. All right. Perimeter security, again, be aware of your doors, windows, locks, keys, so on and so forth. I mentioned limiting access points earlier. Security lighting is going to be important because lighting, especially in the dark time, is what deters crime. If you park a car underneath the light versus a car in the dark, the bad guys will go after the car in the dark because, once again, they don't want to be caught. And so, therefore, the light is going to deter them from attacking the car that's under the light. All right. Parking lot security, surveillance, traffic control, all those things is going to be important. Especially, cars parked after hours and stuff like that. Again, they may be targeted because, if they're not under surveillance or, doesn't look like someone's actually taking care of it, and it's a nice car, well, it'll certainly signal an easy target for the people who want to do these things. Last but not least, procedural and best practices. So creating a security emergency management committee. Hopefully you guys already have something like that in place. Somebody, if you don't have an existing committee, perhaps you can, create a committee or perhaps use an existing committee to talk about security and emergency management issues. Maintain close relations with law enforcement. So I recognize that you guys have, made some reports to police and stuff like that. That's going to be important because, once again, if we're trying to establish things like hate crimes, if a person has done, something 2, 3, 4 times, and it's always against a certain denomination, certain religion, certain whatever, anything that's defined under the hate crime law, then that makes it easier for the police to be able to charge that person with an elevated level of crime. Because hate crime is an indictable offense, whereas vandalism is only a summary offense. So we can establish this person is vandalizing your property under the context of hate crime, they'll be charged with a higher crime. All right, they'll spend more time in jail. Developing security emergency plans. Ideally, you guys will have something like that. Everything from what to do when the alarm goes off to what happens if you get somebody who disrupts the service. All those sort of things is good to have. Communication management, media procedures. Again, part of your contingency planning, how to deal with a catastrophic event. If someone sets fire to the church, how do we then communicate with the media? How do we communicate to our parishioners? All those sort of things, right? Establish financial and cybersecurity controls. Again, churches are no longer safe from people who want to steal from it, whether it's cyber related or an actual robbery. People are, again, that sanctity is gone, and so unfortunately for them we're just another target. So it's a good idea for us to have those controls in place to prevent people from coming in, robbing it, or perhaps locking the church computers or stealing your data and stuff like that. Contractor screening. So. Unless all the work of this beautiful church is done by the parishioners and the people who are within, sometimes you may have to bring in contractors. The contractor could be here to fix lights, fix the plumbing, fix the brickwork, repair windows, that sort of thing. Good idea to make sure that you know who you're bringing in. If you need to, do some vetting to have them. So in the context of the provincial government, we have something called a contractor screening policy. And what that requires is it requires work that's done in sensitive areas to go through a certain limit of vetting. So people who are working in daycare centers and stuff like that, or contractors who may be going into daycare center, they may have to go through a vulnerable sector check because they're going into those areas where there's potentially vulnerable areas. For Ministry of Finance buildings, anybody who enters a Ministry of Finance building has to go through a criminal background check because, again, we're dealing with a whole bunch of really sensitive things: money, personal tax information, all those sort of things, right? So something to consider here as well. You may not necessarily have to require everybody to have a criminal records check, but it may not be a bad thing to have them do reference checks and stuff like that. Insurance, inventory, and artifacts. So I'm pretty sure that the church probably has insurance, for everything from a fire to accidents to deliberate acts and stuff like that. But good thing, insurance companies also require some sort of inventory. So if there's anything of value inside of the church, they want you to make an inventory of it: model numbers, serial numbers, all those things. Artifacts. Churches, have a lot of artifacts. There may be a cherished chalice that you guys have, or perhaps an artifact that's invaluable that you want to make sure that it's covered under their insurance policy. And then last but not least, special events and the off-site excursions and stuff like that. Somebody was mentioning earlier about going into a park to do something. Rather than, in addition to making the plans and setting up the event and deciding which food is coming in, also add to that plan. What do we do? How do we call for help? What do we do when someone tries to disrupt it? Add that segment to your plan so that you're not actually empty-handed when you're actually in it and you're facing that situation. Right. There's a whole bunch more, but I just sort of touched on it right now because we're, in the interest of time, we're a little bit over already. All right. Okay, so that brings us to the close of today's presentation. Any questions? Going once, going twice. Oh, yes, please.
I work in the school board, and you're saying, what if they vandalize the school and they know it's children, like you're saying 13 between 16.
Okay, all right.
Compared to that, like how are they punished if they're caught doing that?
So the age of criminal responsibility in Canada is 12. If you're under the age of 12, you cannot be convicted or charged of a crime. Even if the police grab you, all they do is turn you over to the police. Turn you over to your parents. But however, if they are over the age of 12, they are now chargeable under the Youth Offenders Act. It's called the Young Offenders Act. Now I think it's called Youth Criminal Justice Act or something like that. So they can be charged as a young offender, and they can be arrested by the police, and they actually can serve what they call jail, which is juvenile facilities and stuff like that. Most of the time they'll get probation, and they maybe have to do community service, but yeah, they have to do that. Yeah, go ahead, please. Okay.
Normal sticks, but then they sharpen at the end.
Okay.
And they go to stab each other, like they deal with it. But
okay.
How would that react if somebody actually got hurt? Because I'm seeing a lot of it happening in the school. How does that get dealt with? Because I know they call the police for certain situations, but is there anything that can be done for that?
I would personally do two things. There has to be a policy, and I'm sure the school board has a policy on weapons. And it has to be made known that that kind of activity obviously is not permitted, and that the police will be called. As long as they're of the criminal age of responsibility, or they're over the age of 12, then the police will charge them with assault with a weapon, or even attempted murder if someone gets seriously hurt. Oh yeah. Kids can be charged with murder, right? It just simply means that they're not exempt from the crimes that are listed in the criminal code. It just simply means they have to go through a separate process, and they may not serve life in prison per se, but however, they go through a separate process which is more lenient than, say, adult culture. Right? The third thing that I would do is in the context of CPTED, so crime prevention through environmental design, remove anything that could be used as a weapon. Are those sticks there for deliberate purpose? Are they there for like something that's positive? If it's there, okay, you know what? Can we secure it? But if the sticks are just there because they fall off a tree, then can the custodian remove those things and actually remove the what we call weapons of opportunity? Can the custodian remove those things as part of the outside rounds so that they can't be used? So I'll give you good context. Our downtown building is across from the legislature. Before a protest occurs, we do what's called a FOD check, or foreign objects detection check. So anything that could be used as a projectile to be thrown through the windows, we pick those up and we discard them right away. Rocks, bricks, you name it, all right? Because the last thing we want to give ammunition to the people who are throwing blocks, right? So we were expecting a large protest. We do a sweep of the property. We collect all those things up, make sure nothing's available. Nothing can be used to bash through windows and doors and stuff like that. And then, they can go through. Protests are guaranteed by the Charter of Rights. We want them to protest, but we also don't want them to get to the point where they destroy the building, right? So that's what we do, is we try to limit their ability to be able to destroy the building. So in the context of the school, yeah, have the custodian go through, pick up any sticks unless, they're absolutely needed. Maybe they're part of a display or something like that. If they're part of a display, then try to secure that display so it can't be used as a weapon. But I would take those things away, make sure that it doesn't, it can't be used by the kids. Any other thoughts, questions? All right, again, I'm sorry, it's 12:26. I know we're supposed to be over at 12:15, but however, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully this presentation has been informative and interesting. Again, my relationship with you is not over. I'm going to continue to liaise with Lorraine with any other concerns and questions you might have. Ideally, some point in the future, we might even do a threat risk assessment, but I'm here at your disposal. Thank you so much.
Jim, on behalf of Westminster, nice thing to say.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just I'm hesitant to accept this for a couple of reasons. So I am a Christian, yes. I was baptized as an Anglican. My wife is actually Catholic. I go to church at Holy Family just down the street over here. So I look at it from this perspective: is that I'm here not because of well, actually, I'm kind of here on an obligation, because the skills that I've garnered over the last 30 years, I got them from God. Right? I got them from God. He was the one who blessed me with these, and I like to think of it this way. Strengths and gifts are given to us not so that we can use them for selfish measures or for selfish purposes, but it's to also reach out and protect others, bless others, and you use your skills for the good. So that's why I'm here. Right? So I'm kind of hesitant to receive this, but thank you. I don't want to insult you by not accepting it, but I'm doing this pro bono because, again, this is my way of paying back God. Okay? Thank you. All right, with that, I'm happy to give you guys the rest of the day back. If you have any questions, then please reach out to me. Lorraine has my contact information. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was told I had to.
Oh, okay. Nice to meet you, Jim. It's great. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, SEPTA. So SEPTA is an acronym for Crime Prevention Through Environment. Basically, it was a crime control methodology developed back in 1970, developed in New York. And what they tried to do was, because we can't put a company in the corner, but however, can we control the environment?